Good morning to everyone this morning. It's now 10 a.m. and time to start this hearing. Now, this hearing has been arranged to consider housing issues raised in representation to the proposed Aberdeen City Local Development Plan. Can I first ask that everyone turns on their video at the moment, but mutes their microphones would be helpful. So what we'll do today is, if we're not directly speaking to the meeting, keep your microphones on mute, just because that avoids any kind of background noise. And only those nominated as spokespersons, and we'll come back to that in a minute, should keep their video on throughout this morning's proceedings. Hopefully you got my email earlier asking for each party to have a nominated spokesperson. That just makes the whole process a little easier to manage. Just to do another sound check that we have everyone on. Can everyone hear me? In general, we'll acknowledge agreement just either by a thumbs up or a wave. So can everyone hear me? If you can just confirm, please. Thank you. Now, if at any point you find difficulty hearing, just let me know and I'll seek to address that either by speaking louder or speaking more directly into the microphone. I've opted not to have headphones on today, but I'm hoping that will work okay. But just let me know if you at any point have difficulty in picking me up. Now, my name is Alison Cord and I'm a reporter with the Scottish Government's Planning and Environmental Appeals Division. I've been appointed as lead reporter on this local development plan examination. And as I mentioned before, we're here today to discuss matters related to issue 2 of that examination, which is on housing land. Now, without any further ado, can I ask the participants to introduce themselves, please, starting with the council team. So if the council spokesperson can identify themselves and then introduce your team, please.
Thank you. It seems I've been volunteered for that. So my name's Andy Brownrigg. I work for the local development plan team in the City Council. Do you want me to introduce everybody else, or can they just do themselves?
They can do it themselves. Yeah, that would be useful. And if they can just turn on their camera so I can see.
Yeah. Good. I'll maybe ask David to go next then.
Thanks, Andy. Good morning, everybody. My name is David Dunn, and I'm the Interim Chief Officer of Strategic Place Planning at Aberdeen City Council.
Thank you, David.
I'll go next. Someone on camera. My name is Alan Thompson. I'm a solicitor within Legal Services, team leader of the Licensing, Planning and Environment team at Aberdeen City Council.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson.
I'll go next. My name is Tom Walsh. I'm a senior planner in the local development plan team.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh.
Good morning, everyone. My name's Mel Booth. I'm the Senior Housing Officer with the City Council.
Thank you, Ms. Booth.
That is everybody from the council.
That's great, thank you. Next, can we have the Drum Property Group, please?
Morning, Steve Crawford from Haldefreeze Monroe, representing Drum Property Group.
And Mr. Crawford, you're the only person attending today.
Yep.
Yeah. It's fine, thank you. Homes for Scotland next then, please.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Joe Larner for Holder Planning, acting on behalf of Homes for Scotland. And with me as well is Richard Lewington, who I'll hand over to.
Thank you.
Thanks, Joe. I'm Richard Lewington. I'm the Senior Planning Advisor at Homes for Scotland.
Thank you, Mr. Langton. Your volume didn't sound great there, just a bit of an echo, but maybe that's just because so many of us are on mic at the moment. Okay, and Calla Holmes North, then please.
Hi, Daniel Harrington here from THE Architecture and Planning, representing Calla Holmes North, and also Ross McLennan's here.
Hi there, Ross McLennan, Land Director at Calla.
Thank you, Mr. McLennan. That's great. And Bank on Homes, I believe, are also here this morning.
That's me. I'm Natasha Douglas, the Land and Planning Manager with Bank on Home.
Thank you, Ms. Douglas. And then Barrett North Scotland, I think, are our final party that are attending today.
Hi, Stuart Salter, Getty's consultant, representing Barrett North Scotland.
Thank you. And anyone else speaking on your behalf today?
No.
Just yourself, Mr. Salter. That's fine. Thank you.
If I could just come in, sorry. I'm Marianne Evans of Stuart Milne Homes. I'm also down on the list to speak today. I'm Director of Strategic Land and Planning. Most of my evidence will be led by Homes for Scotland, but as required, I may come in.
Okay, thanks. Now, will you appear, I'm just thinking, I just want the spokespersons on camera, so are you happy for Homes for Scotland to be your spokesperson and you can come in if required?
That's fine, yes.
That's fine. Thank you. It just makes the whole meeting a little bit more manageable to chair if we have pure bodies actually on camera. That's great, thank you. Now, at this point, I think those that are not spokespersons could turn their cameras off, and everyone should make sure they have their mics off unless they're going to speak. Now, introductions over, just to give a little bit of background, this hearing will be webcast live on our public eye TV site. The video recording will be retained on the website after the examination is concluded. By taking part in the virtual process, you are consenting to being filmed and to the use and storage of those images and sound recordings and any information contained in them for webcasting and training purposes and for the purpose of keeping historical records and making those records available to the public. So although we've got the people around the table today, this is very much a hearing in public, and it is being aired so that others with an interest in the plan and others that made representation on this particular issue are able to view it live or as a recording afterwards. For those not directly involved but who may be watching this hearing, we'll give a little bit of background. That the hearing follows on from a request I issued back in February 22. It asked a number of questions to assist my understanding of the issues arising in relation to housing land. The responses received from the parties, most of whom are present today, went some way to clarifying the matters that I had raised. All the related correspondence can be viewed on our website under the heading Further Information Request 2. So anyone that has an interest in looking a bit more into the background of this hearing, you can find it on our website under the tab Further Information Request 2 and also under the Hearing tab. Those exchanges concluded with the Council's letter of 25th of April 2022. Now, following receipt of all these exchanges, I have a number of remaining questions which I considered could be most effectively addressed through today's hearing process, given that just enables us to get round the table and address these remaining issues. These matters are set out on the agenda as issued previously, Again, the agenda is available to view on our website. For clarity, this is a hearing process. These are discussions involving all the relevant participants, chaired by myself and based around the agenda that I have issued. Can I just check that you all have copies of the agenda? Yeah, it's good, thank you. Can I ask that as we go through the agenda, you have the documents referenced in that agenda to hand? We may not have to go back to them all the time, but it's good to have them to hand just in case we have to reference them individually. Now, it's particularly important in a virtual hearing that we speak in turn when invited to do so by the chair, which is me on this occasion, and we should avoid speaking over each other. Before I start the agenda, are there any questions or preliminary matters that anyone wishes to raise? Anyone? Mr. Brownrigg.
Can I just ask how we address each other? You just said Mr. Brownrigg, so I think that's kind of answered it for me. I mean, I do know most of these people on first name terms, and it was just the kind of formality of how we kind of talk to each other here.
Yeah, I mean,
people are comfortable with.
I mean, I'm not particularly precious about that, but we do, I think, maintain a degree of formality in these proceedings. So maybe if we can use our Mr. or Miss. As I say, I'm not personally particularly precious about that, but we'll perhaps stick with that protocol for now. Thank you. Now, anything else that anyone wanted to raise before we start? Take silence as a no. Moving on then, we've covered introductions, which is number 1 on the agenda. I'd like now to turn to 2, which is looking at the context for housing. Now, a lot of this has been aired already in the further information request, so I don't intend to spend a lot of time on this, but I think there is benefit in just reminding ourselves of the context before we get into the detail of the consideration. Now, through the further information requests, I think you all clarified for me that in terms of the strategic development plan, a lot of the detail of the land supply had been considered relatively recently through the strategic development plan examination, and that for the purposes of the local development plan, the focus should be on the additional allowance for the period 2020 to 2032, which is the 5107 figure. So I just wanted to kind of set that as the context to start off with. What I would like to do, though, is to look at paragraph 4.18 of the strategic development plan. If you could have that perhaps to hand, I'll just give you a moment to find that. So paragraph 4.19 as well, if you can just have that to hand in the document. Has everyone got that? Again, if thumbs up just enables me to make sure that you're all with me. No, that's good, thank you. Now, Mr. Brownrigg, for the council, could you just give me a little bit of explanation as to what direction the council took from paragraph 4.18 in terms of making the allocations to contribute to the local development plan?
Yes. Essentially, we kind of looked at this, and obviously SPP in tandem. We recognised that we had a housing land requirement. We knew what the numbers were, that it should be set from the effective supply, the new allocations, and a mixture of windfalls. I think what we'll probably try to talk about probably later on in more detail is that we felt we had clear evidence of brownfield completions over the last kind of 30 years and reasonable assumptions as to what might come forward in future. So we allocated a range of sites, brownfield, greenfield, in different locations and variable sizes. Again, all in line with what we felt was in SPP and the strategic development plan. We felt that kind of diversity of sites that we've identified was reflected in the new Table 3 allocations. These are the new allocations in the proposed plan in Table 3, which range from...
Sorry, just to interrupt. We will get on to some of that detail later on, as you said. But for now, if we could just specifically concentrate on the wording of 4.18, that's what I wanted to just look at. The specific. It seemed to me that it gives certain sort of criteria or direction, if you like, in terms of how the new allowance should be addressed. I just wanted to just see of the particular bits that you felt maybe jumped out of that paragraph in terms of that direction.
Well, I think the main thing that jumped out for us was that the new allocations should consider opportunities to reuse brownfield land and attempt to utilise the constrained supply in the first instance. So that should be the kind of the first port of call. We should look at those first and then try to see, if there was anything remaining, we would then look to greenfield and to other sites. So I think that was our general approach right the way through the process.
Okay, so it's that new allocation should consider opportunities to use brownfield land and attempt to utilise the current constrained supply in the first instance. So that was your kind of starting point.
That was the starting point, yeah.
Okay. Do other parties want to come in terms of 4.18 and in terms of your view of the direction the council should have taken from that? Mr. Larner.
Thank you. Our view of 4.18 is that the opening sentence emphasises the need for deliverable sites over the period 2020 to 2032. I think some of the wording of that policy was subject to an unresolved objection at the time of the SDP. And the SDP reporter, in his consideration of it, and I'll go to a specific reference here, but let me know if people need more time to get there, is paragraph 38 of the SDP examination report, issue 14. In dealing with that objection, the reporter says that no change is necessary because it says explicitly local development plans must identify allocations for the period 2020 to 32, which are deliverable, which is underscored within the time period of this plan. So any new allocations need to be deliverable. An SPP throughout the housing chapter, but particularly paragraphs 110.
Can maybe just leave the SPP for now. We'll come on to that separately. But
okay, sure. Yes, okay. And my second point would be, it says new allocations. So the assumption would be that these are new sites which have not previously been identified for housing.
Thank you, Mr. Warner. Does anyone else want? I'm going to come back to the council on just that matter of that sentence, which are deliverable within the time frame of this period. So the council can just have a bit of a think about that. But did anyone else have anything specific about the wording of 4.18 that they wanted to raise in terms of the context it sets for the assessment, bearing in mind that the local development plan requires to demonstrate consistency with the strategic plan? Anyone else? Okay, thanks. So, Mr. Brownrigg, just in terms of that particular instruction, deliverable within the time frame of this period, how did you apply that to the local development allocations to meet the new allowance?
Sorry, could you repeat that?
Yeah, I wanted to just understand how you had applied the sentence, must identify allocations for the period 2020 to 2032, which are deliverable within the time frame of this period, how you applied that to the new allowance sites.
Well, I mean, they come from a variety of sources. So, I mean, a lot of them were bid sites, which you would expect the people promoting those sites would you would assume that they would be expecting them to come forward within a certain time frame. In terms of the brownfield sites, it's a very long period. We've done some background analysis to see if there was much difference between the delivery of brownfield and greenfield sites, and we couldn't actually see much in the way of discernible difference. It seems to be dependent on individual circumstances. There does seem to be an assumption that brownfield take much longer to deliver than other sites. In our experience, that isn't the case, and as I say, we'll probably go into a little bit more detail on that with some of the later hearing case questions. But in our experience, brownfield sites have been coming forward relatively quickly. The actual volume of them means that even if all aren't necessarily built within a certain time period, there isn't the actual volume of them means that there is enough there to keep the land supply at a healthy level.
Okay, but just to get a little bit of clarity on that point, if you identified specific brownfield sites, and we will be coming on to them in detail, so we won't go into that detail just now, but I was just trying to understand, did you apply that sentence when you were looking at those specific brownfield sites?
I think you have to look at it in the whole, yes. I mean, is there anything physically wrong with the sites? You have to find sites that are suitable for housing in the first instance, and that's why we do a brownfield urban capacity study. Are the sites suitable for housing? Is there any particular barriers to their development that we can identify? Is there anything that can stop them coming forward? We can argue about constraints, but most of the constraints on the brownfield site are marketability constraints and ownership constraints. It's not there's any physical constraints or large significant infrastructure constraints to them. These are sites which are available. We've identified them as being available. They require reusing. They're on brownfield sites. They don't have much in the way of constraints. And in terms of actual the principle of development, we've identified them as being suitable for residential.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Brownrigg. Anyone else want to come back on that particular point? As I say, we are going to talk in detail about the brownfield sites, but it's just that sort of principle that's coming out of the strategic plan. Mr. Larner.
Thank you. Yeah, I think from our view, there at this stage there are some important principles to consider, and that there must be deliverable, and the new sites are our key focuses. And at para 415 of the SDP, there's some discussion of the land supply, and it notes, I'm paraphrasing, but there's supply identified, and it could be that there's no further allocations. However, a considerable portion of the allocations are strategic, and it goes on to say, as such, additional allocations are proposed over the plan period 2020 to 2032. So there's a clear understanding there that the purposes of the allowances is to introduce new supply and refresh what is already there, particularly given that short-term sites will, those that are affected, be built out, and there'll be a need for an ongoing supply of those sites over the plan period. So there's setting a clear context here that these have to be new allocations. A number of the sites the council are proposing, and it's all in our submissions, aren't new sites, and I think the facts of that aren't in dispute between ourselves and the council. The council's Appendix 5 identifies those which are previously allocated in the 2017 plan, and perhaps with the exception of one or two of those, our evidence is the same. So it's really on this principle that I think that the key difference, or one of the key differences, is between us, that these aren't new sites and that they shouldn't be counted towards meeting the allowances, because the allowances are there to provide new supply and refresh what's existing. And I think the council misleads itself in the LDP, the proposed LDP, by simply setting out that you can allocate anything to count towards the allowances that wasn't effective in the 2019 housing land audit. And that's not a reasonable reading of para 4.15 and para 4.18, nor is it consistent with SPP. The SDP is not instructing a sort of spot the difference exercise between the 2019 effective supply and the extant land supply within the proposed LDP, and anything that's in the LDP but not in the effective supply can be counted. That's just not consistent with the instruction that it must, and the word must is used, identify deliverable sites, and they're new sites. Thank you.
Mr. Warren, just because you're speaking just now, just direct this firstly to you, is that there is that sentence, of course, and that's at the start of the paragraph. It does then go on to say, attempt to utilise the constrained supply in the first instance. Is that not in effect what the council have done?
I don't think it is. I think these are existing allocations. They're not new allocations, and perhaps it's not the most straightforward sentence, but it does say new allocations. I don't read that as being the rolling forward of the existing supply, which was considered at the SDP examination in the setting of the allowances. And the SDP reporter discusses that point, paragraph 9 of issue 14 of his report, and it discusses constrained sites in the context of reallocating underperforming employment allocations. So it may be that constrained supply in that instance refers to other constrained sites which have not been allocated for housing till now. But I think read as a whole, that paragraph implies that those constraints, it would be expected that they'd be removed, and that work would be done to remove them at the time of their allocation. And we might get on to the information that's been provided in support of the sites counted towards the allowances in later parts of the agenda. So I won't go there unless you'd like me to at this stage.
I think we'll leave that there just now. I think there's just a bit of an issue here about this sentence, attempt to utilise the constrained supply in the first instance, which I'd like to just explore a little bit more, just so that I can be clear what parties' views are on that. I mean, it does seem to be quite a clear instruction. What the council, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Brownrigg, seem to have done then is to have looked at constrained sites and considered which ones could contribute. Would that be fair? But Mr. Brennan, could you just clarify for me to what extent that was reopening the very things that it seemed that people were agreeing through the further information request were parked, if you like, through the strategic development plan examination? That's the bit I wasn't quite sure about.
Yeah, I mean, we did look at them in the first instance, but I kind of get the impression from what we've been talking about today that all of the sites that we've identified as the allocations are constrained. They're not. It's a mixture. We've looked at the brownfield through the urban capacity study, and we've picked the sites that we've picked for the kind of reasons I've already outlined. That wasn't enough. So you have to look at the greenfield sites, you have to look at the bids, you have to look, you have to look in the round, you have to look at the range of sites, which is what we've done.
Okay, I'll let some others come in on that just to see what their view is on that, utilising the constrained supply in the first instance. And if those sites were considered constrained in the 2019 audit, I mean, would there be, or does it not follow that there could be a circumstance where something has changed so these sites could then be considered as effective? I mean, it's not a carte blanche that if they were constrained in 2019, they're going to be constrained forever. Can I just get people's views on that?
I acknowledge, sorry.
Mr. Salter, sorry.
I acknowledge that. You'll be aware of our response that we have prepared has looked at each and every site, and the detailed information that supports or doesn't support the conclusion that they are effective and capable. Now, again, we will get onto that when we look at that later. But the council has to demonstrate that they are deliverable. Sites that have been washing around the housing land supply for 15 years and relying on those sites, there is no evidence before this examination, as far as I'm concerned, that those sites are capable of delivery. Now, some have changed. Some have got planning permission. We've noted those down. But the majority of them, the vast majority of them, have no planning status at all.
Okay.
Other than being an allocation.
Is your position then that something would need to have changed to enable these sites that were previously constrained?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I understand the council's position saying that the effectiveness point, ownership's a significant constraint. If somebody doesn't want to change their premises to something else for housing, that can't be overcome. Council should know that. Council should know that there is a willing seller of that property and should have evidence to back that up. If the owner of that property doesn't want to develop it for housing, that's it. Game over.
Okay. Anyone else want to, just before I briefly we'll move off this matter because we are going to go into the detail of some of the sites, so I don't want to dwell on it overly, but anyone else, just before I go back to the council for a final word on that approach? Mr. Harrington.
Thank you. I wasn't to labour the point, but it was just to highlight paragraph 26 of the SDP examination report. I think the reporter considered these issues, set out that some sites will perform better, some will deliver less than expected, and then went on to say that the figures that they looked at within that examination can be effectively used to predict the amount of the established supply that is considered to become effective during the periods 2027 to 2032, and then the subsequent period 2033 to 2040. So they were clear in their mind of what was effective based on the audits at that time, but still felt it was necessary to identify additional allocations.
Yeah. So all the sites that were in that 2019 audit that were looked at in terms of contributing to the effective supply, they were considered through the SDP, and that was my understanding. And then those were that assessment was used to identify the new allowance. That follows on, I think, from what you were saying there. Okay. Sorry, Mr. Larner.
Sorry, just a brief point. Just to confirm, I'd agree with Mr. Brownrigg in terms of what we're not saying all of the sites are constrained. But just coming back to this point about the setting of the allowances, my recollection, and having reviewed the SDP, the Strategic Development Plan Authority submission to the SDP examination, it was common ground between the parties that excluded that constrained sites wouldn't be factored in to the setting of the allowances. And the Strategic Development Plan Authority, I think that was their approach throughout. And they speculate, and I'm happy to provide a written submission on this afterwards, that if they had included constrained land in setting of the allowances, then the allowances may well be lower. I don't think it logically follows to exclude constrained sites when setting the allowances, which are sort of to give great certainty to all parties in terms of what to expect from the LDPs, and then sort of re-engineer them back into the process. Certainly without some fairly significant consideration, because it's just not a logical process. If they've been excluded to set the allowances, then reintroducing them at the LDP stage without any further supporting evidence is really just sort of second guessing and having another look and trying to revise the conclusion of the SDP examination. I think the context there is quite important, really, because the allowances are seeking to really be a helpful tool that's not explicitly contemplated in SPP, but I think follows logically on from the idea that you consider the land supply against the housing land requirement to inform new allocations.
Okay, thank you. Just then, Mr. Brownrigg, just to come back, perhaps focusing specifically on the point about basically bringing, and I know we're going to look at in detail at the sites, and there's no suggestion that all of them are constrained, but for those ones where perhaps nothing has changed or it's not evident what might have changed, are you in effect just sort of bringing them back into play, counter to the purpose of the strategic development plan in terms of fixing quite a lot of that at that stage? Just trying to understand that. I don't know if you could help me with that.
we kind of we seem to be second guessing what the strategic development plan says. To me, it's very clear in that paragraph 4.18. Look at the constrained sites, look at brownfield sites. We ought to be delivering 40% of our housing on brownfield sites. That's what we're trying to do here. In terms of talk about the examination is gone. It's finished. We have a strategic development plan there. That's what we should be using to decide what's in the local development plan, not what was said at an examination before that. It's also a plan-led system. If we have to wait for sites to get planning permission or to have some kind of planning status, then I kind of ask the question, what is the point in having a local development plan in the first place? You know, we're trying to do the right thing. We're trying to bring these sites forward, and actually identifying them in the plan is that first step towards making them effective, getting it out there. We're making it known to people. We've gone through the studies, through the urban capacity study, and so on. We've already discounted constrained sites. We discounted about 2,500 of them. And if you go back to the main issues report, which kind of explained how we kind of went through the allocations, we've already discounted 2,500 constrained greenfield sites in terms of those allocations. So now we're doing exactly what the structure plan wants us to do. We're looking at reusing land, and we're looking at the constrained sites in the first instance. We accept that isn't going to fill all of the gaps. That's why we also looked at other sites beyond that, including greenfield.
Thank you. That's helpful clarification. And I've taken the point about we're actually looking at the wording of the strategic development plan here. Just on that though, in terms of would you accept that if a site wasn't effective, would something have to have changed to make it now be something that can come into play at this stage? That was one of the points I think that was made. Just wanted to get your view on that.
I think you'd have to kind of have a look at it on a case-by-case basis. I accept that there are some sites where the status hasn't changed, but in terms, we did the brownfield urban capacity study. We looked at the sites and we kind of made a judgment on each one at the time. So, yeah, as I said, if we felt that they were still suitable, if we felt that there was still a reasonable chance, then they were included in that.
Okay, so it's basically your position then, would be fair to say in summary, that given the priority to bringing forward brownfield sites and looking to use opportunities for brownfield land, that it was appropriate then to look at these brownfield capacity sites, which may have been constrained in the past, and look at whether they could be brought in as part of the allowance. Is that fair reading of your position?
It is, yeah. And as I say, 40% should be delivered on sites. So that's kind of what we're trying to do.
Okay, I think that gives me an understanding of the position of parties in terms of where the differences are in terms of interpretation of strategic development plans. So I think I'll have to take that away now and then come to a conclusion on those matters. I wanted then, unless there's anything burning that anyone wants to raise on strategic development plan, to move on to the context of Scottish planning policy. If I can do that, Mr. Warner, just before we leave.
Sorry, yeah, that could just come in briefly. I'd set it out before, but our argument is that on the face of the SDP, it is clear that these should be new and deliverable allocations. I think the SDP reporter's examination report provides some helpful context, but from our perspective, it is clear on the face of the SDP, the context. And we're not relying on the SDP reporter's report to make anything clear that's not clear in our view in the SDP itself.
In the actual wording of the SDP document.
Indeed, paras 4.15 and 4.1a in particular.
Okay, thank you for that. And just very briefly, and I hope we can just rattle through this because we'll cover this later. But 4.19 gives some direction as well as to the nature of the allowances. It talks about avoiding inhibiting current strategic locations. It talks about it not being an extension to a strategic development site that has been subject of a master planning exercise. So just before we leave the wording of the strategic development plan, I just wanted to ask the council, in terms of that latter part of that sentence, subject of a master planning exercise, how am I directed to those? Is it from page 92 of the proposed LDP, or will I know which of these sites are subject to a master planning exercise? Is it just those ones on page 92 of the proposed plan?
You probably best go back to the 2017 plan, because I think we're talking about the strategic sites that were in the 2017 local development plan, and that has a very similar table at the back of it, which kind of shows which of the sites have master plans on them. So yes, it's basically mainly the big strategic greenfield sites, generally over 500, although there are a number of larger brownfield units and maybe one or two smaller sites in there as well. If you just bear with me, I will try to find the actual reference in the plan itself.
Yeah, I had page 92 has got a little table of master plan. It's got 7 master plan zones, but it also refers to Stonywood, Kingswells, Fryersfield and Oldford.
Oldfold.
Oldford. Oh yeah, sorry.
Yeah. Well, if you go to the 2017 local development plan, Appendix 4 of that has a list of all the master plan sites, both the existing ones, which were in 2017, and our proposed new ones, which were generally not housing sites apart from possibly the AECC site at the Bridge of Don. So there's a list of those there. So those were the existing strategic sites with master plans in the 2017 plan, that when you look at the paragraph in the strategic development plan, it's kind of saying we shouldn't be adding to these particular sites. And there's a list of them there. So it's the likes of Counterswells, Dugford, Fryersfield, Granham, very familiar sites to most of the folks here.
So it's not suggesting that it would prevent an extension to other sites. It's just these strategic master plan sites.
Yes, that would be our reading of it.
Yeah, that was just the one point I wanted to clarify in terms of the direction it gives to the nature of the allowance. Okay, let's then move on from the strategic development plan onto Scottish planning policy briefly. I just wanted we've talked in some detail about the sentence in the strategic development plan, which is must identify allocations which are deliverable within the time frame of this period. I wanted to get people's views as to, do you think that sets a higher bar than Scottish planning policy sets in terms of the wording it uses? And I'm looking particularly at paragraph 117 of Scottish planning policy, if you've got that to hand, and paragraph 119. Now, people in their submissions, they refer to the SDP sentence, but they also talk about the more general wording in Scottish planning policy. And I just wanted to see whether there was a difference in emphasis there. Scottish planning policy talks about effective or expected to become effective in the plan period. SDP talks about must identify allocations deliverable. Is that a slightly different context? What's people's view on that? Can we maybe start with Mr. Salter this time?
Sure. No, it's well, Scottish planning policy. One of the key principles of paragraph 1110 is to support the achievement of the housing land requirement. Now, a process has been gone through to establish new allocations to achieve the housing land requirement. That's where we are with the SDP. So Scottish planning policy expects the housing land requirement to be achieved. Therefore, you must identify allocations that are capable of delivery over the period to 2032. Paragraph 119 should allocate a range of sites which are affected or expected to become affected. That's what certainly we are, and the parties I see are just asking for that evidence to be presented by the council. Looking at the brownfield site, I have no confidence that all those sites will be able to come forward and support the achievement of the housing land requirement. That evidence isn't before us. Maintaining a 5-year housing land supply, what paragraph 123 expect is planning authorities should critically monitor working with housing providers and infrastructure providers to determine the effectiveness of the housing land supply. These are all the building tools that go to achieve your housing land requirement. And I don't think the SDP saying you must, the Scottish planning policy saying you should achieve, it's all going towards the same objective. So I don't think there is a difference in tone really between the two. I think if that's what the question is.
Yeah, it's just that I just wondered if there was a discernible difference in emphasis between what the strategic development plan was saying, but from what you're saying, that you think that the planning objective is
to achieve.
Yeah. Okay. Anyone else wish to? Is that the view of the others in the house building industry, or? Planning objective. And Mr. Brownrigg, would that be your take on it, or do you have a different view?
No, I think that's reasonable, although I probably would point out that it's actually a 13-year period we're talking about here rather than 10, so it is kind of slightly extended. But yes, I think that generally we're talking about the same thing here.
Yeah, okay. And everyone's rehearsed the requirements of Scottish planning policy and their submission, so I don't intend to revisit that in any detail. I just wanted to establish that context. We'll come back to the specific issue of the housing land requirement. That's in in item 5 on the agenda. So we'll come back to that. I don't intend at that point to have a debate about the merits of the housing supply target against the housing land requirement. I think that those arguments have been well aired. So in 5, I'm really just wanting to look at the alternative evidence if we were to look at the housing land requirement, given I know that the council, in terms of its audit, has assessed the supply against the target. But we'll come back to that. Anything else on Scottish planning policy then before we move on to the next item on the agenda? We'll take all shaking hands as agreement that we can move on. I want to then move on to I think on reflection, when I was looking at this again, we can possibly handle, it probably makes sense to handle items 3 and 4 together, given that it's all related to the council's Appendix 5 table on brownfield land and the item about brownfield sites in general. We'll handle that together, and then we'll move on to discuss the new greenfield allowance specifically under item 5. So if we can turn then to the Council's Appendix 5 table insofar as it relates to brownfield land. If you can have them in front of you. Now, in the agenda, I reference the alternative evidence and detail provided in Barrett North Scotland's submissions. There are also review tables provided in Homes for Scotland's evidence and in Stuart Milne Homes evidence as well. But it would be an opportunity to address that alternative, any alternative evidence as we move through the agenda items. Well, generally, I had some questions specifically for the council, just explaining their brownfield assessment first of all, and then we can move on to a more detailed consideration. Now, the council's Appendix 5 brownfield sites table reflects the brownfield capacity contribution the council proposes to rely on in meeting a contribution of 3,807 units towards the new strategic allowance, and that's detailed in the local development plan. Just to be clear from the outset, that contribution itself, it could have been a lesser or indeed a greater contribution from brownfield sites, Mr. Brownrigg. It's not specified anywhere. That's really just what the capacity of your brownfield capacity study came to. That's the figure it came to.
Yes, that's correct. Previous SDPs have actually set a figure for brownfield, but this one didn't. Okay,
so yeah, it basically just arrived at that in terms of where you got to with your field capacity study. And all the sites included in Appendix 1 are those that appear in the plan on page 107, which is Appendix 1 brownfield sites. So we are looking at the content of the local development plan here when we're looking at Appendix 1. Now, from the submissions, it appears to me that there was some degree of agreement about some of the brownfield sites that can contribute to the new allowance. And just going through them can just perhaps just make sure that we're all in agreement about these. The XBP car park was one, which is a capacity of 283. Can we all just signal that there wasn't any dispute about that site?
In terms of it wasn't included in the housing land audit 2019.
No, I was just that it seemed to be, to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, just looking at the various submissions, that people were generally in agreement that that site could make a contribution to the brownfield capacity now.
Well, that one's kind of being built out now, so yeah.
That seemed to follow from what you said in your table, Mr. Salter.
Yes, absolutely.
Yep. Okay, and Victoria Road School. I think there was a capacity there of 50. Yes. Brownrigg, that corresponds to your table.
Yeah.
Or your assumption? Yeah. Anyone else, any alternative view on that one? Okay. Philip Garage, Auchmill Road.
Mr. Larner's got a...
Oh, sorry, Mr. Larner.
Sorry, it just took me a while to find the reference there. I think we've got it, and the council also has it in their Appendix 5 as being previously identified in the 2017 LDP. We dealt with the principle of that under the agenda item 2, but that's an important point in our submissions.
Mr. Brownlee, can you just explain Victoria Road School? That, I mean, it did seem to me one where there was agreement on the basis that, checking my notes here, certainly seemed to be one that Mr. Salter was agreeing could be included. Mr. Brownlee, have you got an update on that one? It's just to really understand. It seemed to me there was agreement on the inclusion of that one, certainly by yourselves and Barrett North.
I mean, we're happy with it. I could ask my colleague Mel to explain a little bit more detail what's happening with that site, if you wish.
Yeah, I do see it's given high priority on the SHIP programme for disposal. Mm-hmm. I think that was one of the reasons. I think that there was some. It seemed to be that circumstances had changed such that it could perhaps be one that was brought in. Mr. Salter.
Yes, to be clear, and to the reference, that site was not included in the 2019 Housing Land Audit, which was the SDP, and therefore it has appeared in the 2021 audit. So therefore, that is a site that has come forward in that
That's right.
intervening period. So by the rule which I'm working to, that those constrained sites that were not included in the 2019 audit can re-enter back in. That is my thought process. So that has been identified as being effective and deliverable in the 2021 audit, and therefore that's a contribution.
Okay. Mr. Harrington, do you have a view on that?
Yeah, so it was just we had a slightly different view on the historical sites. I think it's probably more down to the individual circumstances, but there are a lot of these brownfield sites that have been around for a significant period of time that appeared in audits prior to 2019, but due to the fact that they had such a long period and planning permissions maybe lapsed, or for one reason or another, those sites then were taken out of the audit because there was no view to them being delivered within that period. So I think we're not of the opinion that just because they weren't in the 2019 audit that they should then count. It still needs to be shown that something has changed since that historic position.
Would it be reasonable for me to assume, though, that because it's signalled as high priority within the SHIP and it's now included in the audit programme for 2021, which I believe has been largely agreed, it would be reasonable for me to assume that could be included as a brownfield capacity site?
On this site, yes.
Yes. Thank you. Anyone else, any view on that one? The other one was Philip Garage, Auchmill Road, which again I'd signalled one as there being agreement on that one with a capacity of 96.
I have the capacity noted here of 92. Yes, the consented capacity is 92, not 96. The Housing Land Audit identifies it as a wrong number.
Okay, so I think it's in the audit for 96, but the consent is 92, you're saying?
Yes.
Does that comply with the council's understanding?
This isn't a site which I'm familiar with, so I think I'm probably going to have to ask if any of my colleagues know anything about this.
Okay, yeah, it's appearing.
I've been told it's got consent for 92.
Okay, it's 92 then is the figure for that one. That's fine, and it is appearing in the audit, so I think that follows on from the similar discussion we were having on Victoria Road. Then Greyfriars House was another one that I picked up from the submissions as being one that there seemed to be some degree of agreement that it could be included.
I'm not saying that it can be included. What I'm saying is there is a consent on it. I don't know the full circumstances around it.
Okay.
But it's not in the 2021 audit. So either the council needs to say this is effective and deliverable, or if any other party can say that. But I'm aware there is a consent for planning permission in principle for 140 homes.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Brownrigg. Anything on the add on that? It's a planning consent, so
I can stand corrected if I'm wrong here, but I believe it's not in 2019 because there was nothing happening then, and it's not in 2021 because I think the consent might have been issued after the 1st of January 21. But
you're quite right. It's the 31st of March 2020.
Okay.
Okay. So that would signal recent interest in the site. Is that one that we could perhaps agree that would could logically be included as a brownfield capacity site? Seeing some agreement to. Then 133 Union Street and now included in the 2021 audit as well. It's only for six units. I've taken this from your from the submissions when read together. And similarly, 9 Pittodrie Place.
Sorry, just to clarify, these two sites were constrained in the 19 audit and are now considered effective in the 21 audit, is my understanding. Yeah.
Yeah. So these sites where they were constrained but are now effective, you would agree that circumstances have changed there to such an extent that they can be considered effective in the 2021 audit, even although they may have been discounted at the 2019 stage. Is that a reasonable premise for me to take?
In my view, that's reasonable, although I don't think sites which were previously allocated fall into that same category, as they're not new sites. But neither of these have a previous allocation, as I understand.
Okay, that's fine. So there's some of these that don't seem to be disputed, or there certainly seems to be a degree of agreement that they can be looked at. And just turning then to the council, could you just briefly explain the rationale for some sites being opportunity sites? Now, it seems to me there's like 3 categories of sites. There's the opportunity sites for sites that have appeared previously, so in the 2017 LDP, or maybe even dating back to the 2012 LDP. Some were identified in Appendix 1 to the 2017 LDP, so they weren't opportunity sites. They were just, perhaps explain to me just exactly what Appendix 1 of the proposed LDP, the previous LDP, extant LDP, sorry, to get my terminology correct. What was the basis of these, that they perhaps could contribute, but they weren't being relied upon? Was that their status, or?
No, it's exactly the same as we are here today. They were part of what we were putting forward towards the allocations. It's exactly the same approach.
So they were Appendix 1 brownfield contribution.
Yeah, essentially, yes.
Appendix 1 brownfield contribution, but without an opportunity site reference number.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then you've got these other sites, which are effectively new sites, I believe, which have no allocation reference and are not shown on the proposals map. I just wanted to get an understanding of that, that kind of split of different types of sites you brought into the brownfield.
Yeah, I think a lot of them are very small. A lot of them are probably too small to be included on the LDP maps. So I think that explains a lot of them. There will be one or two there that are probably bigger and that could be included, but at the end of the day, they all still count. They're all identified there. It is probably a reasonable point that it would be helpful if they were mapped, and we kind of have had some thoughts about how we can probably do that in future. Perhaps the simplest means would be through something like the delivery program, so that we can at least show where the sites are and which ones we're talking about. But certainly the majority of ones that are not included are probably because they're too small. There will also be exceptions. There are some very small sites on the LDP map, and there are probably one or two bigger ones on here that aren't on the LDP map, but that's the kind of generality of it.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Brownrigg. I think for Cala Holmes made the specific point about some of these new sites neither having a proposal reference or being shown on the proposals map. Is there anything that you wanted to add to that specific nature of site, if you like, in terms of their contribution and the appropriateness of including them?
Got to admit, I'm not sure if I recall making that point. Ross, was there anything you commented on that?
I don't think so, Daniel.
I think it was just a statement of fact that they were new sites with neither a proposal reference or being shown on the proposals map. I don't think it was anything more than that. Just wanted to see if you had a view on that. Okay, so we agreed that we've got these kind of three different types of categories of site, if you like. So then I want to just give the council a bit of an opportunity to explain some of the rationale behind the brownfield sites, and then I'll turn to other people if that's okay. In your table of brownfield sites for the council, you talk about not listed as constrained, and I just wanted to understand, does that mean that they were counted and simply not assessed? I just wanted to understand what that means in terms of their origins.
Yeah, I think that probably wasn't terribly helpful in retrospect. Essentially, most of the sites that you're there that say not listed as constrained is because they're not actually in the housing land audit in the first place. So if you look at the column next to it where it says identified previously in audit, most of them say no. So they're not listed as constrained because basically they're not listed. So I kind of hope that clarifies that.
So they don't appear. They don't appear in the audit, and
most of them don't appear in the audit. There is one or two there that have kind of emerged, but most of them are simply not listed. So that column probably wasn't, or at least that wording there probably wasn't terribly helpful. Probably should have just been left blank.
And would that apply to their status in the 2019 audit as well, or?
I think we based this on the 19 audit, but again, yeah.
Great too. Right, Mr. Warner.
My understanding was that Appendix 5 was based on the 2021 housing land audit. And there's 22 of the sites listed as constrained. I think that equates to the 2021 audit, but perhaps the council can correct me if I'm wrong there.
Can you just verify that, Mr. Brownrigg?
Yeah, I'm being told here that it was 2021. Yeah.
Okay. So that's the tables based on the 2021. Yeah. With the 22 constrained sites that Mr. Larner refers to. I mean, well, you just took the constraints to be the ones that the council have shown here. It would be 1, 2, 3. Yeah, 22 where they've got either ownership, land use, or marketability constraint, Mr. Warner. That's what you're referring to, is it?
Yes, that's correct. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Thanks for clarifying that. And these other ones where it says not listed as constrained, what's your view on that? And I'll come back to others as well, Mr. Warner, just to clarify.
Our view on it is that effectiveness is to be demonstrated, and paragraph 1, 2, 3 of SPP is clear on that. And there's other references to sort of effective or expected to become effective in para 119. So effectiveness isn't the absence of information, it's the presence of evidence which demonstrates that it's effective and can come forward within 5 years.
Okay, let Mr. Brownrigg respond to that particular point, and then I'll come back to see if anyone else has got. How would you respond to that point that just saying it's not listed as constrained? What evidence would you have that it does comply with the wording in the SDP that it can deliver by 2032?
Well, as I said, these are part of the urban city sites that we kind of went through the exercise before to see their suitability. So this is the kind of first step that we're taking to get them into first of all, identify them through the study. Are they suitable? Good. Get them into the plan. And then we can kind of move it forward from there. As I say, this is the kind of plan-led approach that we're trying to take in line with paragraph 4.18 of the SDP and so on. But as I say, we've kind of been through that already. So,
okay, thank you for that. I want to ask a little bit about the urban capacity study, but anyone else on that specific not listed as constrained point? Mr. Harrington.
So are you looking for comments on the generality or specifics of individual sites at this stage?
Yeah, I'm just trying to establish some sort of general principles in terms of the urban brownfield and this kind of categorisation. We've got these 22 sites where we've got specific constraints that are land use, ownership, marketability, the planning advice note type constraints that you will be familiar with. But we've got these other ones that are stated as not listed as constrained, and I just wanted to understand what your view was on those ones.
I think it depends on the circumstances of the individual sites, as others from the house building industry have suggested, and I have comments on individual sites in addition to those already made. So that would be my comment in general terms, but happy to comment individually on sites.
Okay, that's fine. We'll come back to that. Mr. Larner.
Thank you. So on the general point, Mr. Brownrigg explained that they see this as being plan-led approach. I don't see it in those terms. I think SPP is clear that there's a focus on delivery, and it sets out considerations of how sites can be deemed effective, obviously in concert with the Plan 210, and it sets out the requirement that sites are expected to become effective. The SDP obviously says that they need to be deliverable. I think plan-led approach would establish those facts clearly before it was proposed or sought to proceed to adoption. What we have here is a list of sites that are agreed to be constrained in the latest audit, in sites where an absence of information is noted. I think plan-led needs to be a bit more than sort of identify and they will come. There needs to be some clarity on, when they'll be delivered, who will be delivering them, on what reasonable basis can we expect these sites to be deliverable, and that needs evidence. And I think you'll see in the council's submissions that to FIRO2 in the first response, there's discussion about those sites which don't have an OP reference potentially not having been promoted through the bid process. We're not always clear on site maps and the referencing of these sites between different audits and different plans. I think for the basis of allocation and specifically addressing the allowances that are required to be deliverable, that there's just not enough information here in general terms. Obviously there'll be discussion on specific sites, but there's not much in this appendix on delivery. And a plan-led system is meant to get us somewhere. Sustainable development, sustainable growth being the key objectives of SPP. For those to be achieved, delivery needs to happen on the ground. It's not simply sustainable to refer to a lot of brownfield sites unless you can be confident that they'll be delivered, because if they're chosen or they're put in the place of sites which could deliver, then obviously that sort of cuts across the social and economic strands of sustainable development that's being prioritised in SPP. So that's a general comment. I've not got much to say on the specific sites other than what's agreed in the latest audit, and we've set out in our appendix in terms of what's previously been allocated and what hasn't. But I think those are important principles in considering the evidence.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Salter.
Yeah, I'm I totally agree with Mr. Larner. I'm just going to talk about a site, one site. There's a lot more to talk about here, but it's in general, this is how this matter is to be applied. The council, according to the council, the 1 and 2 Springbank Terrace is not an audit, has never been allocated or not allocated in the previous plan, and is not listed as constrained. That site has been part of the established housing land supply since 2010 and was in audits back in the day. That site was identified in the 2012 local development plan for development. So there's a bit of a rehashing, recirculating, and there are numerous examples in this list of sites that were allocated, were part of the housing land audit process many moons ago, have obviously been deleted for whatever reason, and now the council are trying to re-establish them again, and the evidence of their delivery is non-existent. So and what has changed since, for example, that site was allocated in the 2012 plan that now makes it capable of being effective by 2032? The answer is there is no evidence to support that position at all. Now, that will be across many of these sites. Yes, so I'm just highlighting that issue.
Okay. Mr. Brown, I could just give you the opportunity to come back on those specific points, and that if we take the example of 1 and 2 Springbank Terrace just as an example, can you just give me your view on those matters?
It's one very small example out of 50 odd sites. More will emerge. There's been dozens in the past. We've got a 30-year history of delivering a huge proportion of our sites on brownfield sites, probably around 50-50. Even over the last 10 years, 47% of all completions in Aberdeen have been on brownfield sites. That's despite the fact that we've had, 2 LDPs with fairly significant greenfield releases. We've got the kind of history there. As I say, 47%. If you look at section 2.5 of the main issues report, you'll see a list of sites that were identified in the 2017 plan, which are now largely under construction or built out. A lot of them are brownfield sites just 2 years after adoption. We've talked about sites today, which we kind of listed as being constrained, but we've already talked about a number of sites where progress has been made. They're not all going to come forward at once. There isn't enough brickies in Aberdeen to build all these sites at once. It's a kind of drip effect. It'll happen over time. There'll be other sites as well that we don't know about. It emerges and it changes all of the time. And quite frankly, looking at 1 and 2 Springbank Terrace isn't going to change that. That's just one of the mix of sites. We've been told to look at brownfield first. We've been told to look at constrained in the first instance. That's what we're doing.
Thank you for providing that clarification, Mr. Brownrigg. Ms. Douglas.
Just thought it was worth just coming in there on Mr. Brownrigg's comment about Springbank Terrace. I think when Stuart Salter was highlighting that, it was just one site as an example, but when you look through the list, there's several sites that have been carried forward from the 2017 plan, but you can go further back to the 2012 plan with the brownfield sites that have been carried forward. And then just going back to Mr. Salter's point about the housing land audit, about the 2010 one, I think it's just quite concerning, and whether we go through them individually or not, I think it was just to highlight that Mr. Salter had highlighted the Springbank Terrace as an example. It wasn't just a standalone.
Yeah, I see Mr. Brownrigg nodding that he understands that was an example, but it might be helpful that just if I can understand the carbon capacity study just if I can take it back a little bit to where these sites came from. I've looked at the urban capacity study, but what I couldn't understand is the extent to which they included consideration of land use planning constraints, whether they could be overcome, any consideration of capacity and the appropriateness for housing development. Mr. Brownrigg, is that something that was included in that capacity assessment, or was that kind of done in the background, if you like, and not recorded within the actual document?
Yeah, I mean, it probably was done in the background without being recorded. I mean, there are literally dozens and dozens of sites within industrial areas that are vacant, derelict, and probably need reusing, but they're clearly not suitable for housing. So, you know, we did kind of do this kind of looking at the zoning and the surroundings and you know, other constraints in the background. So you're right, it isn't actually stated within the urban capacity study itself.
So what we see is already a discounting, if you like, of sites that you had.
Yeah, as I say, we didn't go looking for sites in, say, you know, industrial areas or on you know, green belt or urban green space or green space network. You know, these kind of things that they're very much directed into to residential and mixed use areas, or you know, areas where we can actually foresee possible change happening in future. But as I say, the vast majority of them are residential and mixed use zonings.
Okay, I'll give others the opportunity to come back on the Brownfield urban capacity study, but there was another point of clarification I wanted to raise, was just the council's approach was to assume that, having identified these sites through the urban capacity study, that there would be 100% contribution. And again, correct me if I've got this wrong, but 100% contribution from the capacity of those sites. Mr. Brownrigg, in your experience, is that a kind of normal assumption to make through these kind of studies, or was there a particular reason for that in this case?
I mean, we were asked to provide, you know, it's good practice to do a brownfield urban capacity study. That's what we did. There's a range of different means of measuring the capacity, and as I say, that's kind of what we came up with.
Yeah, and the assumption that they could contribute in full in the plan period. Do you think that's a reasonable assumption?
Well, I think it's reasonable in so much as I say, we discounted the sites which we considered unreasonable.
Okay, so these were the kind of the best ones, if you like, the most likely to deliver in that.
Yeah, as I say, I mean, obviously we did discount, as I say, in areas where, like clearly housing, for instance, would be unsuitable.
Okay, can I open that up to other parties then, and perhaps ask you also to comment on your experience elsewhere of urban capacity study approaches, assuming that you have come across this in other authority areas, and just to see what your view was on the council's approach to their urban capacity study and the assumption that 100% contribution could be made. I don't know who wants to. Mr. Larner.
Thank you. Just picking up, I think that Mr. Brownrigg was sort of discussing the sort of brownfield point in general terms. I mean, obviously, the focus of our submissions is on what is deliverable and can be demonstrated to be deliverable. That can be on brownfield and greenfield, of course, although the SDP, again, 4.18 does refer to the expectation that it will be necessary to release greenfield sites. And on the deliverable point and where these sites have come from, how long they've been around for, in PAN 2 2010, paragraph 59 deals with non-effective or constrained sites. And the final sentence two sentences, refer to, in a small minority of cases, it may prove impossible to remove development constraints. Where this occurs, the site should be removed from the housing land supply. Now, I've not followed all of these sites through every iteration of the audit over the past decade, but it does appear that some of them have been in and out, and potentially some of those that aren't in the latest audit, have simply been removed over the years because the constraints on them seem to be intractable, I guess. And I think that, combined with the evidence of some others and the fact that a large proportion of the sites have been identified in previous plans, does seem to indicate that at least some of these sites are sort of a rump of brownfield allocations that simply haven't come forward over a significant period of time. And that might well explain some of the absence from the audit, because the audit, I guess, has got two qualifiers. Should it be even in there in the first place? And paragraph 59 and others speak to that, and then whether or not it's effective. On the urban brownfield capacity itself, I'm not entirely sure what the council's position is on its capacity. In the LDP, it says based on the high density scenario, it may deliver up to 3,807. It appears from future correspondence that that's the assumption of what it will deliver. But it doesn't necessarily follow from the urban capacity study itself, which just sets out scenarios of which the highest and complete delivery has been chosen to inform this plan. I think also the absence of the evidence that informs this and the site selection, which sites have been discounted, it is problematic for understanding how it's been derived. But I'd just come back to the main point I made before, that there's very little evidence in Appendix 5 to positively demonstrate deliverability or otherwise. Perhaps the only things we've got to go on is what's the reference to the ship. That there's not a lot else there to work with, other than the most recent housing land audit, which only covers a very few sites, and I think only a couple, maybe slightly more, are identified as effective within it. So in terms of if effectiveness or likely effectiveness has got to be demonstrated, or there's at least got to be some reasoning behind it, it's not clear where that is in this urban capacity study.
Would you accept Mr. Brownrigg's point, though, that, given their past experience with brownfield sites, the proportion of these, are likely to come forward in the 10-year time frame, just based on what's always happened, if the demand is there, the sites will come forward. Would you accept that premise?
I'm sure some could come forward, but we've got to work with evidence, and that's not clear to me where that is. Certainly in a comprehensive manner, and also we've aired the point previously, so I wouldn't labour it. But a number of these sites, the significant majority in terms of capacity, have been allocated in previous plans, and they're not new allocations, therefore.
Okay, Mr. Brownrigg, I'll give you a chance to come back, but anyone else want to raise, and particularly maybe just picking up on the point of, would you agree that where in the SHIP, the Strategic Housing Investment Plan, these are indicated as a high or medium priority, then these are ones that perhaps I should be looking at as a more of a certainty and fulfilling the requirements of the Strategic Development Plan? see some nodding there. Is that a reasonable assertion? Can I have an answer from someone, please?
I think that was a reasonable assertion, yeah.
Thank you. I'll take that as it's agreement across the board. Mr. Brennan, are there any others there that, I mean, these tend to be the sort of sites that can be picked up for affordable housing. There's obviously a priority in the city for that type of provision. Is there any others that kind of fall into that category, or are these the only ones that present themselves in that respect?
I mean, the urban capacity study was done a year or two ago, and if we did it again, I know that we would find more sites. So I mean, it's something that changes year on year. I mean, we've got the ship sites coming through. You're right. The other thing I think to bear in mind is that it is an estimate of capacity. It's kind of assumed that the figures we have is a kind of maximum. It could deliver more. You know, everybody's assuming that actually, you know, the figures could be less. It could be more. Wellheads, the urban capacity mentioned 134. It's actually delivered 283. We've increased the density in the strategic development plan. We find that when brownfield sites are developed, they tend to come in at a, you know, deliver a higher number of units than what we've anticipated. We kind of say again and again within the urban capacity study that our estimates of capacity are I think, reasonably conservative. So, as I say, it is a kind of moving picture. If we did it all again, we'd come up with a different figure. I think we'd come up with a higher figure because I am aware of more sites coming through.
Okay, but just in terms of what it's understanding, I suppose my position here is that I have to assess the sufficiency of the plan and the sites that are proposed to meet the allowance. So just in terms of the sites that you have here, do you think I can take reasonable comfort from the evidence that you provided, particularly on these ones where you're just saying not listed as constrained? You know, how can I come to a conclusion, or how would you suggest I might come to a conclusion that they can be housing allowances to contribute to that very specific figure of 513?
Well, as I said, because we've gone through the exercise of finding the suitable sites, of doing what the strategic development plan asks in terms of 4.18, and so on. I mean, there are greenfield sites out there that don't have permission, but we do seem to be focusing a lot on brownfield. And also, as I say, the history of delivery, which we've kind of set out in detail in some of the previous further information requests, the progress that have been made on the sites that we've identified here. It's a constantly moving picture, and I know that you have to kind of fix a point in time somewhere. Whenever you do that in a local development plan that takes 4 years to write and is meant to last for 5 years after that, I know is difficult. The picture moves all the time. It's fluid. So you know, I realise the difficulty, but to me, the evidence of what's happened so far up to this point points that in terms of meeting the supply, we're confident.
Okay, thank you. I think just going to check that I've covered one very minor point I had. There's some colour coding in the Barrett North table for the brownfield. Some of the sites are highlighted. I just wanted to, I've got some red and orange. Was I to take something specific from that, Mr. Stolper?
Yeah, sorry. So I think the red was just to say those sites were previously allocated. It was my sort of turning things to beige. Let's call it beige. Is me updating the text in there from the previous brownfield work that was done as part of the LDP. So the beige really refreshes things based upon
I see.
the
So
evidence.
your sort of update,
Yeah.
because this is the updated review. Yeah, okay.
That's correct, yes.
That's fine. And red is all the sites that are previously allocated.
Correct,
Yeah.
yes.
Clarifies point for me. And talked about sites that are already DOP sites. So just in terms of where we're at with this brownfield table, now we've got sites which there seems to be agreement. We've got sites which are identified in the SHIP. There seems to be general agreement that they can be included. It then leaves us with these others. And if there was an acceptance that a proportion of these or an element of them might be counted to contribute, I'm just trying to see what the end point is that the house building industry think I should get to with this particular table. I think the council's position is clear that, well, they could all potentially contribute, and past history shows that they can all come forward, and it's not unreasonable to assume the 3807. I just wanted to see what sort of reasonable endpoint that the house building industry were suggesting I should arrive at in terms of this table. Mr. Warner.
Thank you. I could start on that. Our analysis is essentially that new sites which have not previously been identified in an LDP are candidates for counting towards the allowances where it can be demonstrated that they're effective. And where that gets us to is that around 79% are excluded of the urban capacities, and I think things have changed a bit in the latest audit. Shouldn't be counted on the basis that they've been previously identified in an LDP, and therefore they're not new allocations. There's been some discussion today around the two sites that were non-effective, constrained rather, in the 2019 audit, not allocated but are now deemed effective. It seems reasonable to include those, and we've discussed the SHIP sites as well. But looking at it, and our evidence really is looking at the broad parameters based chiefly on what was previously allocated and the housing, the latest agreed housing land audit. And in terms of the 2021 housing land audit, then 22 of those sites are constrained. There's a reasonable overlap of those with sites that are also previous allocations. So essentially where we get to is, it's our view that those sites that were previously identified in previous plans shouldn't be counted. And those that are constrained in the 2021 housing land audit also shouldn't be counted. But we've not got any evidence, or I've not got any evidence in terms of what sites are effective, because other than what's in the 2021 audit, which I've noted in Appendix 1 of our FIRO2 submission. So I'm not commenting in terms of what is and what can be demonstrated to be effective, because I don't have evidence to that effect, but I know others have prepared such evidence. And I guess just a final point, Mr. Brownrigg, referred to that we're assuming it would be less than the identified capacity. I mean, that's true, but it does also flow from what's written in the plan, which is that it's an up to figure, and that seems to be the basis of the evidence. It seems to be a general density that's been applied to each typology, centre, urban, suburban, to reach those figures. So, we're not assuming that it will be less. That the plan sort of does indicate that, as does the evidence, by using the phrase "up to." And I guess finally, just in terms of the evidence overall, those are the two main considerations we've used. Previous allocations are not new in the terms of powers 418 and 415 of the SDP, and sites that are agreed as being constrained by Homes Scotland, the council, and the other parties to the latest audit shouldn't be considered to be effective or expected to become so.
The becoming effective, though, is slightly different from the audited position, isn't it? Would you accept that the constrained housing land supply, and I think there is a definition of this in the audit, paragraph 1.44, the constrained housing land supply consists of those parts or parts of sites which have problems preventing development starting within 5 years from the base date of the audit. And we are considering a 10-year period here. Would you accept that gives some flexibility for some of these sites to become effective?
Yeah, I accept that. I think the audit looks forward 7 years, perhaps 8. I think Aberdeenshire and Aberdeen have different horizon, but let's say it's 7 years from 2021, then we're already a long way through the plan period there by 2028 that no programming is agreed. So there's a relatively small window of opportunity there for these sites to come forward. And as I've said, there's a significant overlap from our analysis in terms of the sites that have been identified in previous plans and are now constrained. So many of the constrained sites would, in our view, not count in any event because they're not new.
And that would apply, just for clarity's sake, that would apply to the sites that the council, in your position, would apply to the council's listed sites here, which say they were included. They would have to either be, they have to be 2017 Appendix 1 sites with an OP or with an OP number, but they also have to have been previously audited, because if they weren't, they won't have been assessed previously. Is that what you're counting as sites which have already been considered?
I'm counting, so the council's Appendix 5, I'm identifying the sites that they've listed in their second column identified previously in the LDP. Yeah, plus Abbey Road North, which I believe is in the 2017 LDP. And in addition to that, I'm counting sites that were identified as constrained in the 2019 audit and remain constrained. If they've become effective, as is the case for 2 of them, then they can count in our view.
But in the council's column identified previously in the audit, if it says no, then they weren't subject to the 2019 audit, so weren't in the mix, if you like, previously. Would that be fair to say?
It's true that they weren't assessed as part of the SDP report as setting as allowances, but they are extant allocations, and the purpose of the allowances in our reading of the SDP 415 and 418 is that they're new allocations.
Thank you. I understand your position. Is that the position of? Can I just go around it? Ms. Douglas, would that be your understanding of the position? Did you take a similar view, or?
Sorry. Yes.
Yeah, and Mr. Harrington.
Yes. Anything. Our view is that those allocations. I think it goes back to Mr. Lana's point about the two-stage process of the audit. First of all, the site has to be considered to meet the test of becoming a site within the audit. Then it's considered to be it for its effectiveness. So our position is if it was allocated in the 2017 plan or in the audit at the time of the 2000 or the SDP examination, then it shouldn't be counting towards these additional allowances.
Because it's not, in your view, a new site.
Yes, correct.
And Mr. Salter?
Yes, that would be my approach as well, noting that sites that have become effective in programmes and deliverable in the 2021 audit, I would seek to include those, because those are real, that is happening.
Yeah,
but, you know, the sites...
We had covered those sites previously, hadn't we, in our discussion? Yeah. Those are the ones.
Yes, absolutely, as we went through before, and if we want to have a look at the ship sites, maybe it'd be good to have a post-hearing wash up and maybe just try and capture that evidence and information to make, because I think it would be good on if there could be some kind of agreement on that from all parties, certainly between all parties on this side. I would say, because the council's evidence that they have submitted and the new information that's submitted yesterday, which is very helpful that you requested, I think we'll have to when we have a look at that, you know, we'll have to wash it. You know.
It's a good point. I think it might be helpful if given that you're all largely in agreement, if you could come out with what your output, if you like, of the table would be, and with the output that could be relied on. Not to say that I'm taking that in evidence, obviously you'd have to weigh that with the council's position, but it's very clear then to me what your position is as, you know, the representatives of the industry and Homes for Scotland against what Mr. Brownrigg's position is, which I think I'm clear about in terms of the council's evidence. Mr. Brownrigg, anything final that you want to? I intend to move on from the brownfield analysis now and have a short break, but was there anything final that you wanted to say on what I should do with this table?
Are we still to discuss about whether these are new allocations or not? Is that part of this section, or is that still to come?
No, I think we should cover that here. I think that's something we could cover here. Because
I mean, at a very technical level, point of adoption, the 2017 LDP ceases to have any status, and we will have a new LDP based on an updated capacity study, a new strategic development plan on the SEA development options. It'll be a new plan and it'll have new allocations. Now, I accept in reality that we've seen some of these sites before, but that, in all honesty, makes them no different to most of the greenfield sites. Indeed, most of the other opportunity sites and many of the policies. This is nothing new. There once upon a time, when Aberdeen didn't have a local plan for 17 years. And the gap between those two plans meant that they were like chalk and cheese. I think it was between 1991 and 2008. Nowadays, we have a 5-year cycle, and this plan will end up being the 4th local development plan or local plan in 14 years. The local plans are evolutionary, and much of the content is carried over. It's the same here. The brownfield sites are no exception. the important thing to remember is they haven't been double counted. They are available for development. It's good, it's sustainable to have brownfield sites developed, and they can, if they're allowed to stay in the local development plan, they can make a significant contribution to the housing land supply. And I just kind of wanted to make that clear. We're focusing very much on one small part of the plan, but I have to say it's no different from other parts as well.
Okay, and we have discussed obviously I think it's my understanding that the position of the development industry is because it talks about a new allowance. How do you see that squaring with what you're talking about there?
Well, I mean, I don't want to get bogged into too much detail, but if you go back to paragraph 415 in the strategic development plan, that's talking about strategic allocations. The big master plan sites. It's not talking about the brownfield sites as it were. So I mean, I'm happy to see sites recycled as it were. That's the whole point of what we're trying to do here.
Okay, thank you, and thank you for clarifying that, Mr. Larner.
Thank you. Could I just seek to clarify the council's position on what will count towards the allowances? Is it their position that upon adoption, all of the allocations within the plan, whether they were previous allocations or new ones, count towards meeting the allowances?
No.
Sorry, I'll let you answer that directly, Mr. Brennan.
Yeah, no, I mean, they will all count towards meeting the 5-year housing land supply, which is basically what we're trying to do here. We have to make sure we've got an effective 5-year supply throughout the lifetime of the plan. That's the most important thing here. We think we've demonstrated the numbers. This is simply a numbers game. We've got 5107. We think we've got 5107. In fact, we think we've got more than that. But the purpose of that, the overall objective, the things that we're trying to do here is to make sure that we've got a 5-year supply. That's the important thing.
Yeah. Is it just on that point, Mr. Brennan, is it the case that there has to be a focus because of the terms of the strategic development plan on the 5107? Once the plan is adopted, then the normal kind of considerations of the 5-year land supply come into play, and that will then be the focus of the process. So do you think is that a reasonable summary of the distinction to be made? Sorry, you're on mute, Mr. Brownrigg.
Sorry, yes, if I understand you correctly, then yes.
Yeah. Does that follow other people's? Although we're focused on that 5107, the planning objective is to maintain the 5-year land supply, and that will be something that will then be the focus. The 5107 in itself will not be the focus of any future assessment of the housing land supply. Is that?
I'd agree with that, but I think there's two processes here. There's establishing enough land to meet the HLR, and the allowances, my understanding of them, is a convenient tool to try and focus in on what extra is needed from the LDP rather than opening up the whole assessment process again. And I mean, it comes back to the plan-led system. We've got bits of SPP 119 focus on delivery. You've got to provide enough deliverable sites over the 10 years. Meeting the 5107 is a matter of consistency with the SDP. It's not just a sort of numbers game. It's the building blocks of a plan-led system. Is you set out these stages and you set out reasonable processes to meet them, which everyone can follow. The purpose of the plan is to provide the housing for the need and demand that's being assessed to exist. The ongoing way of dealing with that is 5-year land supply, which we'll come on to. But I think these allowances, it's been my understanding that the council's got a clear view of what counts towards them, and it's not the entire supply. It's the 5,400 and so units that it identifies. So it's just a matter of following through the SDP. I did understand that we had reasonable common ground, that those allowances are an important part of getting sufficient land supply, because that's the first step. If the LDP doesn't allocate enough sites, then to pass the tests in the SDP and SPP, then it's not likely that the 5-year land supply will be maintained at all times.
Okay, thank you for that. Now, so where we're leaving that table then is that there will be an opportunity for an update from the house building industry, and if you could coordinate yourselves to provide me with a table clarifying your position. I'll have to think about then, perhaps we need to allow, I will allow then the council to respond to that, but then I'd like to bring that to a close. So then that would take me to a position where I would be able to make my conclusions on that matter. Now, leaving the matter of brownfield, we're going to move on now to talk about the greenfield sites that contribute to the allowance, the 5107 allowance. I think we should have a 10-minute break. I think the meat of our discussion today has probably been considered in the brownfield issues. So I'm hoping that we can move through the next issues a bit swifter. So let's have a 10-minute break, and if you can turn off your cameras during that period, and we'll reconvene at 12:20. Thank you, everyone. Okay, thank you. It's 20 past. Thank you for coming back for round two. We're now on item 5 on the agenda. We may still be waiting for Mr. Brownrigg. Go on. Thank you. Yeah, so if we can turn then to item 5, I wanted to talk specifically about, we're still focusing on the 5107 from the strategic plan in terms of the table 3 new housing allocations on page 23 of the proposed local development plan, and the sufficiency of those allocations was a matter raised in representation. Now, there's a few initial questions that I just wanted for the purposes of clarification from Mr. Brownrigg. At the time the LDP proposed plan was drafted, there's a number of these sites, OP6, OP35, OP37, OP83, where you had not put specific capacities in, you had put just basically the size of the site. Now, yesterday you sent in an update which actually provides some capacity numbers for those sites. Can you just explain then how you should treat that and how that might alter the totals that can be relied on in terms of this table?
Yes, the reason that there wasn't any capacity figures in the plan is that I think there's one exception, but I think they're mainly NHS sites that were submitted as bids, but without any actual capacity figures. Kind of in anticipation of this part of the hearing, we circulated the table yesterday, which kind of had a look at it. We also had a look at the Barrett's submission on this as well. So we've kind of tried to maybe hopefully shorten this part of the session by doing that, and by at least trying to provide some indication. And I think that there actually isn't a huge amount of difference between what ourselves and what Barrett's submitted on this. There might be a little bit of in terms of the programming, but I'm hoping that what we've done is at least helpful in explaining where we think we are with capacity and programming on the table 3 sites.
So if we are to, and we'll come to the capacities we've assumed for these sites, but if we are to count them, it appears that does have an effect on the upping the contribution from these greenfield sites, in that you didn't count them, you didn't count capacity before. Is that correct? Or
yeah, they're not all greenfield. There's a mixture there, but yes, that's right. We didn't include those within the 5107.
Yeah, so some of these were quite substantial sites, but you didn't count an output from them.
That's correct. So yeah, Wood End in particular, but the others all contribute too.
And what leads you to be able to count an output on those sites now?
I think we basically, as I say, in response to what we saw coming up here, I think we applied some of the brownfield urban capacity kind of methodologies for calculating the capacities, and I understand that's what Barrett's did as well.
That's fine, Mr. Brownrigg. Now, I just wanted to, just before we get into the detail of this, ascertain, obviously, I have now updated sort of programming assumptions from Barrett North. I also have the council's updated figures provided on the 23rd of May. Have other parties got a different position, or are you happy to go with that kind of assumed programming assumptions? Just in principle, are you adopting a different position, or is there kind of agreement within? I know that you'd all taken slightly different, you had made slightly different submissions, but I just wondered if you were able to align with that, or if you had specific sites where you wanted to take a different view. We can start with Mr. Warner. What was your position on that?
We don't have a specific position on the programming of those sites or the council's update. Obviously, with Homes Scotland being a membership organisation, it wouldn't be possible to organise a response if we wish to do so in the time available from its submission. So I'll take instruction from my client on how, if at all, they wish to address those matters and perhaps wrap it up in the submission we discussed before the break on the urban capacity study.
Okay, I appreciate that the council's information came in late. It's largely a reflection of what was presented in the Barratt North submission. I don't, Mr. Crawford, did you have a view, or?
Not on the programming necessarily, but maybe on the clients of the urban capacity study densities, and that the evidence, the historical evidence in urban capacity, the average density is significantly lower than the densities that were used to come to the 307 in the urban capacity study. So applying the same density approach to these sites might give you a higher number than you might expect, because the historical evidence is showing that the delivery of brownfield sites is of a lower density than the upper limit might suggest.
Okay. Some of these are actually appearing in the 2021 audit now as well. Were you aware of that?
I have not checked that, so I'm not aware of what they're saying in that audit.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you, Mr. Crawford. Ms. Douglas, your position on the tables and the reasonableness of the programming and approach that has been adopted?
Yeah, we can generally agree them.
That's helpful. Thank you, Mr. Harrington.
We don't have any other opinions on the programming being offered by others.
That's fine. And Mr. Salter, just on the basis of, you did this table and then the council have picked up on it. So just to understand the basis of your approach to the programming, do you want to just quickly run through that for us so that we're all clear?
Yeah, so we reviewed documents. We looked at sites for submitting planning applications. We, generally, following adoption for plan, it'll be 2 years minimum before a PPP. So they're quite optimistic assumptions being built in. There are a number of queries just on the council's submission. I note that they have increased the silver burn capacity to 150. I'll double check that consent. That may be correct.
I had
on Royal.
Sorry.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry.
Specifically, I wanted to go through. So perhaps I can do that just to keep it clear in my own mind rather than thinking about the table. That would be good. But it was just to get that kind of background to the number. So if people don't mind, we'll work between the Barratt submission and the council's updated figures. Appreciating Homes for Scotland, you might want to take instruction from your members in terms of how you approach the programming. But just working with that as our basis at the moment, if we take GC06 and the updated figures from the council, just very quickly, the ones where I had put, most of it is agreed, I think, in terms of there seems to be a large degree of consistency. The ones where I had question marks were in relation to Pullover Hill. The council had a slightly more optimistic programming there, with the total remaining being 50, and it really being, Barrett North had the remaining 50, and it's spread over the later period of the plan period, whereas the council had it earlier on in the process. Ms Douglas.
Can probably give some clarification there, because Bank on Construction are delivering that site, and it is on site, and the figures the council are showing are as per the figures that we provided them as part of the housing land audit, so that they are.
Okay, so if I refer to that site in the audit, that'll be confirmed from that.
It should be, those are the same figures that we'd certainly passed on to the council historically.
And the capacity being 536 for that site.
Yeah, that's correct. It's also under construction just now.
Okay, so that's that. Yeah, Mr. Salter.
Just to clarify, our figures were from the 2021 housing land audit for Clover Hill. I understand the council's figures have emerged through discussions about the draft 2022 audit.
That would be correct, Mr. Salter, yeah.
Okay, we're prepared to accept that seems to reflect the reality of the situation at the moment.
Yeah.
Okay, that's fine. And then just moving down, there seemed to be an increase in 50 on the assumption on Silverburn, which is OP12. Mr. Salter, you had that down as capacity of 100, and the council have 150. That's based on the application that's pending approval, Mr. Brownrigg. That's your understanding of it then, that the capacity would be increased by that application that's coming forward?
Yeah, that's correct. We can supply details of that if you so wish, but it's essentially the new application.
Yeah, so that would be an increase in 50 on what was assumed previously.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, and then moving down Granite Hill, the council are assuming that can be built out. Mr. Salter, you had a slightly more pessimistic view of the programming on that one.
That's for a review of the bid documents.
Yeah.
Looking at the issues that surrounded those there.
Okay, and the council. You just want to explain your position on that one, please?
Yes, I wondered if I could maybe, we're kind of getting into detail that I'm not fully au fait with. I wondered if I could maybe bring in Tom and David on these points, who might be able to better answer some of them than myself, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. If they want to turn their cameras on, that'd be good.
Hi, Tom here. This is nice to see some familiar faces again before I get into it. It's like a housing land audit meeting at the moment. I suppose the updated information that we have on that table comes from our colleagues in our housing team, and they've got quite an ambitious programme for housing delivery over the coming years. I think there's also a commitment on behalf of the administration to deliver, I think it's 2,000 homes over a period of time, and this falls into that delivery pattern. So anything that we have added to the table that was provided by Barrett, and appreciate the effort that went into this table. Obviously, we haven't diverged from it hugely. We've only added extra information where we've felt it's been more helpful to give greater context. But this all comes from the SHIP and the council's commitment to deliver affordable housing over the next 5 to 10 years. I think Mr. Dunn might be able to give greater context on the administrative commitments on that.
Yeah.
Thank you. Not really. I think Mr. Walsh has spelled it out quite well. Obviously, we have a new, the site that you've just mentioned, we have a new administration who've included that in their manifesto as a commitment as well. So it sort of doubles down on the previous commitments that have been made around those sites.
Okay, thank you for that. And otherwise, there was, I think, largely agreement on all the other sites if we take a direct comparison with Mr. Salter's submission. Apart from Royal Devenick Park, now I'm aware that's subject of a separate issue. It's one that I'm dealing with, and I've been pursuing further written submissions on that one anyway. So I'm sure you'll all understand that just because planning application has been refused, there is a due process here through the development plan examination process to look at the sufficiency or otherwise of that site. So I wasn't intending to talk about that in any kind of detail, but I mean, you've assumed no output from that site, Mr. Salter. If it was supported for inclusion in the plan, would you agree that that is likely to be an effective site that could come forward within the timeframe of the plan?
Of course. I would also wish to note that the detailed planning application submitted was 100 homes, I think. Was that wrong? I'll double check.
I'll double check that. I've got that, and I've got the details of that planning permission as a part of a further information request. That's fine. So that leaves us with basically, if we were to take that, the assumed capacity from the proposed plan of these sites, which are the table 3 new housing allocations, was 1604, and that would increase that to, if we took the council's position, to 2077. So would you agree that there is some additional contribution that can be made from these sites added to the brownfield to make that all of that together will contribute to the 5107? Yep, we're nodding our heads. Okay, so I think perhaps just an opportunity then for the development industry to catch their comments on that updated figure and updated contribution from Table 3, given that the Council's submission came in quite late, and to include that with what we've already talked about on the brownfield capacity table. Mr. Salter.
Yeah, just one query, and it's I've not really been able to establish this as part of the LDP process. The council, for the NHS side, the council refers to bid documents. I had a look through, and I may have missed them, but I had a look through the respondent document list, and I'm not entirely sure I can find them. It would be helpful if the council could reference those sites and the bid document site, to see them, and also to understand whether because that will explain the disposal strategy the NHS has for these sites. Because as I understand, they are all still functioning NHS sites. So I'm just trying to create that picture. So as I said, the programming I have assumed is optimistic. It assumes that these things will just happen. But the council refers to specific bid document that were given to them by the NHS. Could those be provided, or if they're already provided, could the council identify the representation references?
Mr. Brenner?
Yeah, we can do that. I think it probably the original bids, and I'll have to double check this myself, but I think they came in at the pre-main issues stage. But the stuff will be somewhere on our website, so I can forward the links to those.
Okay, I would need that to be anything to be submitted in evidence to the examination, anything that we're relying upon. So
yeah,
we need them to come in so they could be, if we're going to have them to be electronic. I mean, it might be that you can just provide some sort of summary information and cross-reference. We could perhaps leave that to you, but really just to look at it in terms of providing the evidence to substantiate the wording that you've got in that updated figure regarding the NHS sites. Is that something that you could provide?
But we will dig something out. It will be there somewhere. You might already have it. I'm not sure, but we'll try and find the right thing.
Yeah, draw that together and if perhaps it would be helpful to everyone if you can do that as a first step, and then the other parties can then submit after that. And to do that relatively quickly, Mr. Brownrigg, if you could, just so that we can not have too much delay. I was hoping this hearing could wrap up this issue as much as possible, so really trying to make sure that we can roll anything further on quite quickly. Okay, I think then I'm content to leave the new allocation contribution in table 3 at that. Anything else that anyone wanted to raise on item 5 on the agenda? Okay, thank you. Now, moving on then to the issue of the housing land requirement. Now, we've talked up till now, our focus has been on the 5107, and when we talked about the SPP, the requirements of SPP being also about the meeting the housing land requirement. So there's two strands: meeting the housing land requirement up to year 10 from the date of adoption. We're all familiar with that requirement, and providing for a 5-year supply at all times. Now, the evidence on this, I think, because everyone's been focused on the 5107, wasn't articulated perhaps that clearly in submissions, although you've all made comments on it. And so it's really just for me to be able to break down the figures and have some understanding of how that fits with the bigger picture. And I had made a stab at putting down the figures that I had gleaned, and the council quite helpfully and correctly, I think, pointed out that the time frame in Appendix 1 is 13 years. Is everyone agreed that that is in fact the case? Yeah. And also the remaining HLR, given that we're talking about the period 2022 to 2032, actually will cover 11 audit years. Is that correct? Okay. So just in terms of the figures that I had set out there, that then alters my table 2. The only real figure it alters is the 5-year requirement. It should be lower, and so it should be 6826. Is that correct?
What I would say is, as you noted, there's 2 periods to look at, which are 4,290 for 16 to 20, or 4 years in that period.
Yep.
If there's any shortfall or unmet housing land requirement from that period, it has to be carried forward. So I understand that there have been, according to the 2021 housing land audit for that equivalent period, there's 4,153 homes completed. That would leave a remaining 137. So that needs to get added into the 17,160, which will give you a new figure of 17,297.
Okay, can I just get the council's clarification then? That would be your understanding of that if we were to count that kind of. I know there's debates about, whether backlog should be carried forward. I don't want to get, we could spend the whole day talking about that. But if I was to take that position that the backlog should be carried forward into the next year, would that be the correct assumption?
Again, can I bring in Tom on this one? This is something that he kind of looked at. So
yeah,
and over.
Yeah.
Thanks for that. Yes, it's the philosophical question of the age, I think, isn't it? In terms of whether this is carried forward. I suppose the issue we have here is how we measure that going forward as a plan. This group here that we have today are largely part of the housing land audit group that we work together. So we would take the programming that we would receive every year from the housing land audit, and we would look at against the housing land requirement. We have obviously adapted over the last, I think, 2 years now to both measure the housing supply target and the housing land requirement when we're doing the audit, because we know that's the way the situation has moved. And I think there's general consensus among this group that's the way to measure the audit going forward. We haven't seen any issues in terms of like whether we're under the 5-year land supply for either the housing supply target or the housing land requirement. What we've seen so far is that that's quite robust. So the audit may not pick up this residual issue that Mr. Salter has referred to there going forward, because that's not how it's set out. That's not how it's set out in the PPF. But I suppose in terms of like trying to get the base level set for a plan going forward, I think that we probably, we could agree that you'll have to say it again, Mr. Salter. What number was it? 150, was it?
137 homes that needs to be carried forward.
Calculator right in front of me there, but I think and actually just Mr. Larner and I had similar conversations in terms of when we're doing the strategic development plan meeting. It is good to agree a base point that we can move forward when we're measuring to. So I think we can probably reasonably agree that figure can be carried forward as a residual one. So then I think was it you said, Mr. Salter, 17297, was that the number?
Yeah.
Okay.
So just so that I can make sure I've got a record, so the housing land requirement 2020 to 2032 would consequently be adjusted to 17297.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Now, the completions to 2020, that I took that from the audit being 659. Is everyone content with that being the kind of then taking away that so that we can get to a position where we're at the year of adoption? Does that make sense?
I think the council can agree with that. I think the audit has never been disputed or by none of the parties that are here, so I'm assuming that there's consensus on that.
Yeah, so I can take that as read, and then again the similar approach to taking away the completions in 2021.
Yes.
Now, what does that then mean? What does that then give me as the remaining housing land requirement? Has anyone done the maths?
Yes, surprisingly, 15,154.
15,154. 15,154. I can check this, but that's that's helpful. So the remaining housing land requirement 2022 to 2032, 15,154. And then the 5-year requirement, the difference between what I had set out, then the 10 becomes an 11, multiplied by 5, which gives 6826. Is that correct?
I've got 6888, but
I think that's 6826 was the figure the council came out with, was it?
Yeah, we had 6826, but I think it's
we didn't carry forward the number from before, so therefore that's why. So it's 15,000.
Need to do the maths for 17,297 minus 659 minus 1484 to get to
15,154.
15,154 divided by 11.
Brings up by 5.
Yeah, and then what figure does that then come, just so that I've aired that publicly?
Yep.
Yeah, that's the 6888. Yeah.
Well,
6888. Okay. So the 6888, the effective supply is the next column I got, is so comparing the requirement to the supply. The supply I took from the audit was 6553. Is everyone in agreement with that figure?
Yes.
Mr. Walsh?
If you've taken it from the audit, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so anyone then want to comment on that 5-year land supply position, given those figures? So we have a 5-year requirement of 6888 compared with effective supply as audited of 6553. Any comments on that?
Obviously, that housing land audit figure will include Clover Hill at a different build rate from what we've just been talking about. So it might be worth trying to take those sites out that are identified as allocating, contributing as to the housing allowance. Because that, do you understand what I mean? Is there's different figures. You would also have to then start including agreed programming for the new allocations as well. That's essentially what we're trying to do here.
Yeah, but in terms of the current position, and so just looking at what we have in terms of the current position, and then obviously on top of that, we've got anything that's new and contributing to that figure. So I mean, it shows that in the current position, it's a relatively. Would you agree it's a relatively small difference, just relying on what we've got in the land supply at the moment for the first 5-year period?
It's 273 shortfall, isn't it? If my maths hasn't deserted me, which is possible.
Yeah. Mr. Brownrigg, did you have any comment to make on that in terms of the?
Apologies, 335. My maths was wrong. 335.
Taking into account the new figures that we've just had. Yeah.
I trust you all explicitly, given that I don't have a calculator in front of me. So yeah, I mean, look, if I'm sure we'll say all these again. If there are any mistakes, we can pick up on that.
Yeah. Okay. Could I then? Sorry, Mr. Walsh.
Yeah, I just the thing we do need to be mindful of is that, like, as Mr. Salter said there's bits of information from different time periods coming in here that need, so we probably, how to put it, in a way it's easy to take the calculator out here and do some quick maths, but we probably do need to have a look at it, reflect on it, or we take Mr. Larner's first answer there instead of a second answer. But what I would say is that we do have a mechanism for measuring land supply that's agreed, which is the housing land audit going forward. So we do need to be mindful of what we're doing here, in that the audit, the way it's set out, is also operating at an Aberdeenshire housing market area as well, in terms of how it gauges this. So there's different parts to this puzzle in how we look at it. You know, we take the Aberdeen city part of the Aberdeen housing market area and the Aberdeenshire part of the Aberdeen housing market area in combination to make sure that we're meeting the housing land requirements. So it's a slightly different beast maybe than to other LDPs. I don't think anybody's probably put it maybe the scale, the size of these numbers, I don't think anybody's maybe too alarmed by, but we also need to reflect on the fact that in some years programming will increase and some years programming will go down. And if we're only looking at a 5-year period, as opposed to what we just talked about, which was over a 10-year period, then we're in a slightly different situation here. We've never had an issue where we've fallen below the 5-year housing supply target, and since we've started measuring the housing land requirement, we've never fallen under that either. So from a council's position in terms of how we measure this, we don't foresee there being any issue. We're not projecting any issue going forward, and that is agreed because, as I keep saying, quite a few of the people on this call are part of our working group for our housing land audit, so we've collectively agreed this.
Yeah, and I've noticed the conclusions of the 2021 audit in that respect, and essentially this is a different exercise, just looking at the degree of. I mean, my job is to look at the sufficiency of the local development plan in terms of the SPP context. So it's a slightly different. I'm not, we're not looking at it in terms of justifying a planning application process. It is a different context here. It's just to understand how the supply compares to what the strategic plan says and what that means in terms of the sufficiency of the local development plan, if that gives you the context for my understanding of my role here. Mr. Salter, you were going to come in.
Yeah, I was just, regardless, the SDP has a housing land requirement for the city area, and this is just an exercise to look at how is the city doing in terms of its strategic development plan. We'll go on to the next 2 rows, which I did some more maths about, which in clarity, but it's just an exercise that needs to be undertaken.
Okay, so we've got some agreement about those figures. How you then, we have been through an exercise where we've looked at the programming of the greenfield sites. We've talked about the brownfield sites. So it's really just how that all dovetails together in terms of looking forward at the 10-year time frame. So what would you suggest is the best approach then to roll those elements together, just so that we make sure we've got a full picture of the position? Mr. Larner.
Thanks very much. I think there's 2 separate issues. There's ensuring that the housing land requirement, that there's confidence that can be met at the outset of the plan over the period for 10 years from the adoption. And my understanding of it is that the SDP has helpfully sought to narrow down the scope of what we're looking at to ensure that those allowances are met, and that what's allocated to meet them is new and deliverable. I think that's the test in terms of Para 418 and of the SDP, and in terms of complying with the schedules in the SDP for providing enough land. And then there's a separate question of 5-year housing land supply requiring to be maintained at all times, which is an ongoing matter to be assessed annually through the audit. And I'd suggest there's 2 strands to that. There's whether or not there'll be 5-year land supply on the date of adoption. Because if there isn't, then the plan will be, or at least the housing policies will be out of date in the context of SPP Para 33 and Para 125. And separately, how that 5-year land supply will be maintained on an ongoing basis. And in terms of the maintenance on an ongoing basis, I think there's 2 steps. There's ensuring that enough deliverable sites are allocated at the outset to give confidence going forward. And there's also ensuring that there's adequate policies within the plan to ensure that should a shortfall emerge during the process, during the delivery stage of the plan, that there's a policy to remedy that. And what this plan lacks in policy LR1 is what many other plans include. And our proposed LDP submissions deal with this, is a policy that states in the event of a 5-year housing land supply shortfall, other effective sites will be considered through the development management process. So you've got our submissions, and obviously we'll update them in due course in terms of how we think the land requirement is likely to be met and the allowances at the outset. But I think a further change is also necessary to have a land release policy that's more clearly worded in the plan than is currently there, to ensure that the 5-year land supply is maintained and there's a mechanism for doing that.
Okay, thank you for that, Mr. Warnock. What I would suggest then, for the purposes of transparency and to make sure that we're all clear about the figures, is that if in undertaking to update the position of the house building industry, if you could encompass a table that puts in these figures that we've agreed today, that I would find that very helpful, just so that we've all got clarity about what we've agreed today in terms of the remaining housing land requirement. That's the kind of main thing that we need to identify. Now, the extent to which we'd get into commentary about the we then have the programme of the greenfield sites. We don't have any consequent programming for the brownfield sites. I think you could perhaps leave me to make my own assumptions about that, but I'll leave you to think about. I don't want to get into a whole new strand of evidence, because I mean we've all had ample opportunity to air these issues. So the main thing I was trying to do here was establish what the housing land requirement, remaining housing land requirement was, and what the 5-year requirement would be in terms of maintaining the 5-year land supply. The rest I'd be relatively comfortable for you to leave to me to make conclusions based on the other evidence. But you might want to have a think about that in terms of the next round of submissions. But just to take care not to start presenting lots of new information, because I don't think that would be helpful at all at this stage, and is likely to lead to a protracted examination, which we're trying to avoid. So could we leave that? Is there anything else the council want? You'll have opportunity, of course, to comment then finally on those figures. Anything else the council wanted to raise on that issue before we move on to the final item on the agenda? Mr. Harrington, and then Mr. Slaughter.
Yes, thank you. It was just going back a little bit on the figure 16,719 as the remaining potential effective supply. I just wanted to clarify, because in the column it's referred to as effective supply from 2027 to 2032. My understanding is that figures all remaining or the complete effective supply that's in the audit. Some of those sites are programmed up to, I think, going on as far as 2038. It was just to check that that's you've not assessed what was shown as effective up to 2032. It's just all of the effective land.
Yeah, that's basically going on the premise that you had all instructed me that what had been rehearsed in terms of the 2019 might fluctuate a little, but the premise of that could be accepted. So if you took that as the total effective supply, and we took away what we know is a more up-to-date position, we'd be left with that residue. Does that explain? Does that make sense?
It does, but I guess it's the end date that you're listing as 2032 would probably actually be longer than that, given the programming of those sites.
In terms of the updated position?
Yes.
Yeah. Mr. Salter.
So I undertook that exercise based on table 3 and the conclusions of the STP examination, and so followed the STP reporter's methodology in order to establish whether, based on the 2021 figures, the housing land requirement would be met. And essentially, if there's a shortfall, that would be the housing allowance, or what was determined as the housing allowance for the SDP. So I looked at those figures, and we have established that, and I can make this very clear in the response following this, that if they, which is not what we're asking to do, but if the housing allowance was redone today based upon the 2021 housing land audit, housing allowance would be 6,468 homes. Following the SDP reporters methodology adopted for the SDP.
Okay.
You can explain that if you wish.
Yeah.
Or I could leave it.
Just conscious of, we have a chain of correspondence. We have had the opportunity to address that, and we, as far as I was concerned, had seemed to reach agreement on the 5107 being the allowance figure.
I do agree. I don't think we should revisit that, but I think it's worth noting that if the exercise was redone based on the most up-to-date audit, the housing land requirement and taking the housing allowances would now be 6,468 homes. I could perhaps clarify that with Homes for Scotland as part of the joint submission as well that's going to come in, I think next.
Yeah, no, I'm happy for specific points that are related to the evidence that we've rehearsed today, but just to be cautious not to start to introduce new matters that will, then need protracted. I feel that everyone's had a fair opportunity to put their evidence forward. So I would appreciate if you can just focus in on the matters that we've got on the agenda today. Now there might be consequential matters you can consider that, but retain that focus in terms of making sure we're not straying off piste. Okay, thank you for that. I'd like to then move on to now. Obviously, I have to go away and consider all this, including the further submissions that we've talked about doing today, which hopefully everyone's clear as to what the next steps will be on that. We can recap on that briefly. Now, if I were to conclude that what the house building industry are telling me here, and obviously I've got a whole raft of other representations in the plan which are given equal weight that I have to consider, but in the hypothetical circumstance that I was to agree with the house building industry that there was a deficiency in the way that the council had addressed the housing allowance in terms of what it sets out for the strategic development plan, or the housing land requirements and the policy context set by Scottish planning policy. How do you suggest I would be addressing that? Now, obviously, we have alternative bid sites that are in the mix. I don't want to talk in detail about any of those because we have a separate process to look at these bid sites. That's one obvious option. In terms of the allocation of sites, we talked about what strategic development plan tells us in terms of avoiding extension to master plan sites. It also talks about accessible locations that reduce the travel distance. So these seem to be some parameters for the assessment of other bid sites. Is there anything else that you think I should be particularly taking into account? The other aspect I thought was important was deliverability by 2032, which is obviously something that we've also talked about today. Anything else in terms of the kind of broad principles of bringing in bid sites to the plan? Mr. Harrington.
Thank you. Carla had set out in their representations an assessment of where existing allocations and new allocations were by ward, and it was just, I think, in looking at any new allocations, if that was to be the case, I think it's important to try and understand where those are and where there is the potential market for new allocations to be made, particularly identifying the Kingswells ward where there is significant demand for housing, but limited allocation and limited availability of land supply. So it would be a good location to support development and deliver development, particularly because of the facilities and services and infrastructure that exists at that location currently. And also, I think it was clear that the SDP doesn't rule out larger allocations, and given the period of time that the plan is phased over, medium to large allocations can still play a significant role in delivering large numbers of housing over the plan period.
Thank you. If the site or the bid site is next door to another big site, or in the immediate vicinity, do you think that, and if the site is already identified in the local development plan and has programming, do you think there's capacity for that extension? Would it not mean that just followed on at a later date, or can it run in tandem? What's your experience of that and your view on that?
I think in some of the larger allocations, that would be the inevitable result of extending existing allocations, if it's under the control of the same developer. But it might not necessarily be the case if it's another developer next door that's able to open up another avenue of sales with a different product mix. It's also, there are some sites in the plan currently that are coming towards the end of the development cycle, and in addition to those sites would likely then fall within the next plan period. So in some circumstances it might not be appropriate, but in others I think it could well deliver units over the next plan period.
Okay, that's helpful. Mr. Salter?
I agree with Mr. Harrington saying, obviously, I think the reporter should check what sites were approved by the council and perhaps pitched and switched at the committee. There might have been sites that had favour up to proposed plan, but were not necessarily, that were removed for purposes, for example, if the council thought they were going to meet the housing land requirement. So I think that because those sites will have council support, and I think the Schedule 4s will set that out. But that should be the first port of call. You will obviously come up to your own assessment of those sites. But then, yes, and fundamentally, the plan must allocate the land that can be demonstrated to meet the housing land requirement or housing allowance. However, it's there's no other option as I see it. It's up to the reporters to obviously establish whether that evidence is before them to give them the confidence to do so. Okay,
thank you for that, Mr. Salter. And sorry, Mr. Harrington, you've got your hand up again.
Sorry, it was just to come back. I'm reflecting on why you asked me the question on extending to existing allocations. I'm not sure if you picked up the difference between Countess Wells and Kingswells. Kingswells has no strategic allocations. It was just to make sure that you weren't thinking I was talking about extensions to Countess Wells.
I wasn't thinking about it in any particular context. It was just in the generality of an extension to an existing allocation. Miss Douglas.
Yeah, I'd agree with everything that Mr. Salter had said, as well as ensuring that the sites are deliverable. But I think it's also important to make sure that they're sustainable and the infrastructure is there to ensure that they can come forward. I think in terms of size of site, it's important that there are a variety of sites that do come forward and that they can make a reasonable contribution as well.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Crawford?
Thank you. I'd agree with that. I think the range of sites is really important in terms of deliverability and meeting housing land requirements. I think what I would say on behalf of Drum is that there's also an opportunity to look at strategic reserve housing sites, which have been in the plan previously, and it comes back to something that Mr. Larner said previously in terms of the LR1 land release policy, that it's a safety net for housing land. I mean, large sites have proven to take a long time to deliver. You know, some of these larger sites have been in the plan for many years. But by identifying strategic reserve sites, it allows the planning of those well into the future. And if they're required, then they're required. But if they're not required, then they remain as a strategic reserve option. And the strategic development plan does allow for that approach. I would definitely agree that the sites have to be deliverable in the short term, certainly and have a range of site sizes to, if there was alternative sites required.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Crawford. Now, I understand the council's officer's position is that you're not able to take a position on particular bid sites, but just in generality, in terms of the principles of what sites, what parameters might be applied in terms of bringing sites forward, is there anything specific that the council wish to bring to my attention?
Probably just a couple of things. There is a kind of drawdown mechanism in paragraph 4.21 of the strategic development plan. I'm not sure it's entirely helpful, but there is something there. In terms of bid sites, you're right. Our position is that the plan is sound as it is. What I would say in terms of alternatives, though, ideally there should be sites that have already been consulted on.
Yeah.
So sites that have kind of been through the main issues process. And again, I know that there are sites in there that haven't gone through that process, but in an ideal world, that's probably something that we should be looking at. Something that we haven't explored is increasing densities in existing sites as well. I'll just throw that in the mix.
Is that where there's a already known increase in density, or were you
I'm just throwing in generalities here that's an approach that Aberdeenshire took was looking at existing sites that were in the plan and increased the actual numbers for those, especially given the context that the strategic development plan itself increased the kind of suggested minimum densities.
Yeah. Obviously, the council had submitted Appendix 7, which is potential additional sites, and some of these are quite substantial. I don't know if you've got that there. We've got, for instance, Rubislaw Quarry Hill, which is 245, South Esplanade, West Aberdeen 258. I don't know if these sites are. I couldn't see these sites in the audit, so I'm presuming these are new sites that have just come in. Is there any position to be taken on them, or are these just purely windfall sites that aren't able to count?
I think, and again, I'll kind of look to my colleagues, but I think these are windfall sites that have kind of come in since 2019 audit, which we were originally looking at. So yeah.
And it's not the council's position that I should be taking these into account in any way, or I wasn't quite sure what you were advising.
I think it's kind of demonstrated. What we're saying is that we feel that the local development plan is sufficient. There are other sites that are coming through that will contribute to the 5-year supply. I think that's basically all we're saying. and will continue to do so over the lifetime of the plan.
Yeah, and some of them of quite a significant scale.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. No, that's helpful. Anything? Sorry, Ms. Douglas, did you have your hand up there? Or?
No, I didn't.
Oh no, sorry. Thank you. So bid sites, we've covered that. We've talked about Appendix 7. We've talked briefly about a policy approach, and you've talked about LR1, which is the one that relates to long-term allocations. I mean, the other option is basically the circular 6 2013 development planning in paragraphs 122 and 123, and I'll just to shortcut things, just read that to you quickly. In limited exceptional circumstances, the reporter may identify a serious policy omission or deficiency in the plan, such as inconsistency with the National Planning Framework or Scottish planning policy. If this deficiency is not capable of being resolved through the examination process due to a lack of sufficient information, or if the information required could not be provided within the normal timescale for an examination, the reporter will highlight the deficiency in the examination report. So, I mean, that's a kind of fallback option, if you like, if these matters couldn't be addressed in the time frame, or the remaining time frame of the local development plan examination. Did anyone have any comment to make on that option in terms of how it's set out in the circular?
I think that approach has been taken in other plans, but I mean, all that you end up having going forward is planning by appeal, continuously. I can name well, I won't talk about local development plans, but I can name many local development plans where there has been an insufficient housing land supply allocated, and that's just the result of the examination process. But I mean, all it's led to is planning by appeal continuously. There's nobody's certainty. I think all parties just want certainty about the way forward for Aberdeen City, and I think that hopefully there is sufficient information before the reporters in this examination that will allow you, should you find additional sites are required, that those can be allocated.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Anything to comment on that paragraph of the circular? Ms. Douglas?
I'd agree with everything that Mr. Salter said, and it would be very positive if we could avoid that sort of situation and avoid planning by appeal, which I don't think anyone wants. And I guess an ideal situation, if you conclude that there is a shortfall, is the allocation of additional land, and as well as a potential policy that would deal with that situation should it arrive. And there's several local authorities that have policies that could be lifted and used, such as Fife Council, Stirling Council, West Lothian Council, as well as Falkirk Council. The policies that they have within their local development plans, they all, in one way or another, mirror each other. But that would be my suggestion, that you could lift something from those local authorities and include that within your recommendations.
Yeah. Do you think the changing circumstance of, I know that you made submissions on MPF4, but do you think the changing circumstance of that leads to a certain degree of caution in terms of allocating significant new and additional allocations?
I think we've all agreed around this table that MPF4 is a separate topic, and until the government have finished their consultation on it, I'm sure there are people around the table here that would hope that there are changes to be made for MPF4, but without having a crystal ball, we can't gaze into the future. And I think that needs to be a separate subject here. And we need to deal with the information that's presented in front of us.
Just before us, just now.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll let Mr. Walsh, you had your hand up.
Thank you, Chair. It just pipped Mr. Larner to the post there. I think just I would like to say, I mean, a couple of the parties have said we don't want to go down the route of planning by appeal. We don't either. You know, we believe in a plan-led system. And I think, you know, there's been a lot of sites that have come through either the main issues report or the call for sites that are there, that are assessed, that, you know, are out there, you know, that can be considered. But we've never been in a situation where we have had to plan by appeal in the Northeast. There's always been large scale allocations. I don't think, you know, we could be accused of being stingy with our housing land allocations historically. They've been quite substantial. And as a result of that, we've never been in a situation where, you know, planning by appeal would be triggered, because we've always met the 5-year housing land requirement. And, you know, we don't view, I mean, I know we've been talking through a lot of different components here today, and there's been a lot of different pieces of evidence put forward. Again, we have to go back and reflect on that, but we don't feel that there is a deficiency. We feel that what we've demonstrated shows that we have, what we were putting forward as allocations meets the housing land requirement. And I think in a broad context, even though there's difference, the difference isn't huge either, you know, in terms of the numbers that we come down to. Although I'll have to go back to Mr. Slater on the maths, because he's been keeping a running score there, I think. You know, we've historically allocated to a level that's met whatever we've been required to meet. I think you've touched on it there as well, that there are other sites that come through that maintain the housing land supply, the housing land requirement. They're not allocated sites. We've never said that they're allocated sites, but they continue, if they are part of future audits as we go forward, they will continue to reflect that and show that the housing land requirement will be met. So, I mean, we don't see that there is a deficiency here from these discussions. And obviously it's up to, you know, it's up to the reporter to come down in a position on that. But that wouldn't be our position. And in terms of, but what I would go back to those, Ms. Douglas's point there, I think we're all quite agreed that, you know, the MPF4 is a bit too nebulous at this point, that we can't, you know, it's likely going to change, not just even in the all tenure housing land requirement, but probably the policies as well. So I don't think we can really have any surety on that.
Does it though indicate that there's likely to be an early review of the local development plan? Well, certainly 5 years.
Yeah, I mean, I do. Yeah, I mean, I know what you mean in that terms. We'll have a new housing, or sorry, yes, we'll have a new planning system, so we will need to develop a new plan to meet that quite quickly. And from what I recall of the transitional arrangements, well, the letter, I don't know if we can call them arrangements, but it is 2026, I think, which is when new plans need to be either in for examination or for adoption, which is quite soon. So, you know, we'd be well on track to looking at if there were any issues and resolving those issues within the life of even this plan. So, there, you know, I think early review is just coming regardless. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Brownrigg, you had your hand up earlier. Was there anything further you wanted to say, or did Mr. Walsh cover that?
No, I think Mr. Walsh covered it. I was kind of just going to agree with folks that the kind of nuclear option we were talking about isn't really required, and certainly isn't wanted from our side either. So yeah, that was all I was going to say.
Okay, thank you for that. Mr. Warner, you had a point to make?
Thank you. Yeah, on the point of an early review, I think allowing the plan to be adopted with the deficiency in the land supply, if that was ultimately the result of your assessment, it would be inconsistent with the SDP, and it would obviously also be inconsistent with SPP. There have been plans that have been allowed to be adopted with deficiencies on the basis that they can undertake an early review. But the record there is not a good one. I mean, the obvious ones are, I guess, Glasgow and Edinburgh. Glasgow was adopted over 5 years ago and is the only Cloud Plan authority to not seek to bring forward an LDP under the new SDP. So it won't have an LDP in place for some time yet. Edinburgh was adopted 5.5 years ago, and the new plan, all going well, probably won't be in place until at least another year. So the record in terms of that being an effective resolution, it isn't a good one. It's tended to be that authorities that have been found to have a problem in the first attempt have struggled to even prepare an adequate plan in the 5 years at all, let alone an early review. And I think more broadly, it wouldn't be a good situation for the 3 largest cities in Scotland to all have deficient plans at the same time. So while that's been taken elsewhere, I don't think the record on that being an effective resolution is a good one. If anything, plans that are adopted on the basis that they'll do an early review have tended to be later with a replacement plan than those that haven't. And just on point 2 of your agenda in terms of the policy response, as I set out before, and apologies if I'm perhaps repeating myself here, but I think that the 5-year land supply release test has to be separate to ensuring that the land supply is adequate at the outset. It's not, in our view, a appropriate remedy for an insufficient land supply for the reason Ms. Douglas and others have outlined, in that it essentially just, invites appeals rather than dealing with the land supply at the plan stage.
Okay, Mr. Salter.
Yeah, and just that was found at by Lord Carloway for the Inverclyde washing. The DPA in that instance relied on a housing land supply policy to remedy a shortfall situation, and the law basically said that was not appropriate to do. You can't introduce a policy to remedy a situation. I can respell that back out. It was just when Joe was talking about in that. So that was the view taken for the court session from the Inverclyde decision in terms of Clyde plan and the application there.
Taking a note of that just to for reference. Anything else then on? We've covered the potential options to address. Now, just before I'll give you a very brief opportunity to sum up. I'm conscious I'm kind of extending beyond my time frame and into your lunch break, and I do apologise for that, but I think it's better just to, we're almost there, so I think just to finish, if everyone's happy with that, just to crack on. I think just for another maybe 5-10 minutes, I think we should wrap up. Is everyone happy with that? Yeah, don't have to be anywhere urgently. Okay, then just to conclude then in terms of the process from here on in, well, it might be helpful just in respect for me just to detail in a procedure notice exactly what I'm expecting of parties now, just for the avoidance of doubt. And my understanding of what we agreed today was that the council, through Mr. Brownrigg, will provide any evidence to support the NHS position in terms of programming, and hopefully turn that around quite quickly. And then on the back of that, the house building industry, speaking to each other jointly, would produce an update of the brownfield capacity assumptions, the table 3 new housing allocation assumptions, and also the housing land requirement calculation based on the figures that we've discussed today. I then give a very short final period for the council to respond, and then that would bring the whole matter to a close within a fairly short time frame. Is everyone happy with that course of action, which should enable me, I a clear position on which to move forward, and we'll keep the whole process transparent in terms of making sure that we have everything on the council's on our website. Mr. Walsh.
Yeah, I'm just taking note of that. We'll get the NHS bids to everybody as quickly as we can. And just to clarify again, that it's limited to that, and there won't be new pieces of information added into the into this at this point. Will you send a formal letter back to everybody specifically setting out what it is you're expecting? Yeah.
Just to clarify what I'm expecting now.
Yes.
If you can, bearing in mind our discussion today, if you can maybe just pull together that NHS information so that we don't have a delay just waiting for that, because that will enable the other parties.
I think it's already ready from what I can see. Yeah, but I just, in terms of what our colleagues in the house building industry are required to do, if you can clarify that, or what they're not required to do.
Yes, in terms of sticking to what we've discussed today in terms of updating the numbers and the figures that we've talked about today. Yeah. Okay. Anything then final that anyone wishes to add? I'll just quickly go around the table, and we can start off with the council. Anything final that you wish to draw to my attention before we close today?
No, I think I'm happy with what's been said, and I don't want to kind of start repeating it all. So I'm content to leave it as it is.
Okay. Thank you very much for that, Mr. Warner.
Thank you. Yeah, if I could just very briefly just sum up from our side of things. I think, firstly, we welcome the opportunity for the hearing. It's been very helpful, I think, in getting to the bottom of some of these issues. There's a lot of common ground between ourselves and the council, and that's helped to narrow the scope of things. We're more or less in agreement on the national planning context, on the amount of allowances to be met. We seem to be in agreement on the 5-year land supply calculation in terms of at least the facts that we've discussed today. And more or less, I think, in terms of the factual matters of what has been identified in previous plans and what is identified as constrained in the 2021 housing land audit, and any inconsistencies will iron out in the course of the further discussions. But I do think what remains between us are fundamental issues in terms of how you interpret that data and that information. What the clear focus of the SDP and of SPP is on ensuring deliverability, and it's assumed, and it's set out clearly, that that's to be demonstrated, not to be assumed in the absence of sufficient information. The council's misdirected itself in its discussion of what it's to do in its housing chapter by saying that it can simply use any site which is not identified as constrained in the 2019 housing land audit as counting towards the allowances. I don't think that's a reasonable interpretation of the SDP, which places a clear emphasis on sites needing to be deliverable. And that's meant that rather than in the main seeking out new and deliverable sites, a large part of the council's evidence just seems to be almost a spot the difference exercise between 2019 constrained supply and its extant land supply in the LDP. And that's just not consistent with SPP or what the SDP requires them to do. They're required to find effective sites. And I think that's sort of the fundamental issue that's between us is whether or not these sites are deliverable. And while the council does seem to have strayed a bit today in terms of what can count towards an allowance, I think there's common ground between us that an allowance simply isn't any site that will be allocated as part of this new plan. There is a qualifying threshold to count for an allowance. But in our view, that means it has to be a new site and demonstrably deliverable. And and that is the main difference between us. And we'll look forward to sort of taking the discussions from today and updating precisely where that lands us with the numbers. But it seems to me that a significant shortfall remains to be addressed. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Warner. Mr. Crawford?
Thank you. Drum Property Group have adopted the Housing Land Evidence by Homes for Scotland, so I've got nothing really further to add on that basis. In terms of the options to address the shortfall now or in the future, then I think we'd be agreeing with what's been said is on a range of sites would be required over a short, medium and long term, and include strategic reserve housing sites and an updated land release policy to help plan in a longer term and ensure that there is an ongoing healthy land supply. I think that's all.
Thank you, Mr. Crawford. Ms. Douglas?
I don't have anything to add to what Mr. Larner and Mr. Crawford have said.
That's fine, thank you very much. Mr. Harrington?
I'm happy to leave it there as well. Nothing further to add.
Okay, thank you. Everyone will be eager to go and have some lunch now, I think. And Mr. Salter?
No, nothing to add. Looking forward to the lunch.
Okay, I do apologise for running a bit over into the lunch hour, but I think it was good just to finish that off. Mr. Walsh, did you have anything that you wanted to add? I thought the council had perhaps summed up there, but you were looking.
No, I think we'll leave it at that. We've all I think we've all put in a shift this morning, haven't we?
We haven't. I'd just like to thank you all very much for that contribution today. It's been very helpful. I do appreciate your patience in bearing with it just to get through the agenda this morning. And I'll be in touch with these further instructions just to clarify that this week, if that's possible. Okay, thank you all very much. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks all.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.